The hum of activity in Elon Musk's office was a familiar backdrop to his relentless schedule. Emails poured in faster than his assistants could filter them, and his mind was constantly leaping between projects: SpaceX launches, Tesla innovations, Neuralink trials, and the latest chaos on social media. But among the flood of unread messages, one subject line stood out. Meet the 7-year-old known as the human Google, a true prodigy. Elon leaned back in his chair, one eyebrow raised. The human Google, he thought, his skepticism flaring. He clicked on the email, scanning through the brief introduction. Dear Mr. Musk, we know your time is precious, but we believe you'll find this worth it. Our son, Lucas, has an extraordinary gift. At just 7 years old, he has the ability to recall and analyze information with uncanny precision. He's been called the human Google. Lucas has been following your work closely and recently told us, I need to speak with Elon Musk because he's missing something important about Mars. He insists it's urgent. With admiration, Sarah and Michael Green. Elon chuckled under his breath. The idea of a child claiming to understand his Mars projects better than he did was amusing, to say the least. But curiosity tugged at him. He leaned forward, rereading the email. It wasn't the first time people had claimed to know something urgent about his work, but there was something about this message, the tone, the boldness, that intrigued him. Jess, he called out to his assistant, who peeked into his office with a tablet in hand. Yes, Mr. Musk? Look into this for me. Find out if these people are legit. He forwarded the email with a click. And schedule a call if they check out. Jess gave him a curious look but nodded. On it. Later that evening, as Elon sat in his living room scrolling through data reports, Jess's name popped up on his phone. Found something interesting, she said. The family checks out. They're normal folks from Oregon. No publicity stunts or shady connections. And Lucas? He's been winning academic awards since he was 4. There's even a video of him solving college-level calculus problems in seconds. Want me to send it? Do it, Elon replied, suddenly more interested. Within moments, a video link appeared. Elon clicked, and his screen filled with the image of a small boy with bright blue eyes and tousled brown hair. He was standing at a whiteboard, a marker in hand, confidently explaining an advanced math problem to a room full of adults who looked utterly baffled. And that's why the derivative leads to this optimal solution, Lucas concluded, capping the marker with a small, triumphant smile. Elon watched in silence, his amusement fading into genuine intrigue. This wasn't a gimmick. This kid was the real deal. 2 days later, the call was set. Lucas's parents appeared on screen first, a friendly-looking couple in their 30s. Sarah, the mother, spoke first. Thank you for taking the time to speak with us, Mr. Musk. We weren't sure if you'd respond. Elon waved off the formalities. Let's get to it. Where's Lucas? A moment later, Lucas's face filled the screen. He was perched on a chair, his feet dangling above the floor, but his expression was serious, almost too mature for a child his age. Hi, Mr. Musk, Lucas said, his voice steady. I've been studying your Mars plans. They're good, but there's a problem you haven't solved yet. Elon smirked. Oh, and what's that? Lucas leaned closer to the camera, his blue eyes locking onto Elon's. Your approach to sustainable oxygen generation won't work long-term because it doesn't account for the pressure variances caused by Mars's seasonal shifts. If you don't fix it, your colonies will fail in less than 5 years. Elon's smirk vanished. He leaned forward, suddenly very interested. And what do you propose we do about it? Lucas grinned. Let me show you. What exactly does Lucas know, and is he right? Elon Musk was about to find out. Elon Musk was not a man easily impressed, but something about Lucas's confident declaration stayed with him long after the call. The boy wasn't just parroting information he'd read online. He had an understanding of the complexities involved in Mars colonization that many adults lacked. Intrigued and perhaps a little challenged, Elon decided to take the next step. He had his team arrange for Lucas and his family to visit Tesla headquarters. A private jet was sent to pick them up, ensuring they traveled in comfort. As the day approached, Elon couldn't shake the anticipation. He wasn't sure what to expect, a precocious kid with an inflated ego or a genuine prodigy who could offer real insights. Either way, he was ready. Lucas and his parents arrived at Tesla headquarters on a sunny afternoon. The building's sleek, futuristic design seemed to intimidate the couple, but Lucas was unfazed. He stepped out of the car, eyes scanning the towering glass structure with analytical curiosity. "This place is cool," Lucas said, his voice calm but tinged with excitement. "It's like stepping into the future." Elon was waiting just inside the main lobby, dressed casually in jeans and a Tesla t-shirt. He approached the family with a welcoming smile. "Mr. and Mrs. Green," he greeted, shaking their hands. Then he turned to Lucas, crouching slightly to meet the boy's gaze. "And you must be Lucas, the human Google." Lucas grinned. "That's what people call me. But you can just call me Lucas." Elon laughed. "Fair enough. Ready to show me what you've got?" Lucas nodded eagerly. "Absolutely." Elon led the family to a private conference room. The room was equipped with a massive interactive screen, whiteboards, and all the tools Lucas could possibly need. As they settled in, Elon gestured for Lucas to take the stage. "All right, Lucas," Elon said, leaning back in his chair. "The floor is yours. Convince me." Lucas's parents looked nervous, but the boy was calm and confident. He walked up to the whiteboard, picked up a marker, and began drawing a diagram of Mars's atmosphere. "Your plan for oxygen generation involves using MOXIE-like technology to split carbon dioxide into oxygen and carbon monoxide," Lucas began. "It works well in theory, but Mars's seasons create massive temperature and pressure changes that will destabilize the system over time." Elon folded his arms, his eyes narrowing. "Go on." Lucas switched to the interactive screen, pulling up a simulation he had created. "I modeled the atmospheric conditions over a 10-year period and found that the pressure variances will cause structural stress on the oxygen production units. By year 5, they'll start failing at a rate of 40%. Elon leaned forward, now fully engaged. "And your solution?" Lucas smiled and tapped the screen, revealing another simulation. "Instead of relying solely on MOXIE-like units, you need a hybrid system that incorporates subterranean oxygen farms. By using Mars's regolith as a natural insulator, you can stabilize the temperature and pressure around the units, increasing their lifespan and efficiency." The room fell silent as everyone processed what Lucas had just presented. Elon's mind raced. The kid's analysis was not only accurate, it was brilliant. "You've done your homework," Elon admitted, his tone serious. "But let's see how you handle real-time problem solving." He walked to the whiteboard and wrote a complex equation related to rocket propulsion. "Solve this, and then tell me how you'd optimize it for a Mars launch." Lucas studied the equation for a moment, his brow furrowed in concentration. Then, without hesitation, he began writing. His small hand moved quickly, solving the problem step by step while explaining his reasoning out loud. The optimal solution would involve reducing the payload weight by 5% through modular design. That way, you can increase efficiency without compromising safety, Lucas concluded, capping the marker. Elon stared at the whiteboard, then at Lucas. A slow smile spread across his face. "Not bad, kid. Not bad at all." Lucas had proven himself in the first round, but Elon wasn't done testing him yet. What would the next challenge reveal about this young prodigy? Elon Musk wasn't one to hand out praise lightly, but Lucas's performance so far had been undeniably impressive. Yet, in Elon's mind, one question remained. Could the boy think on his feet under real pressure, beyond theoretical problems and simulations? "All right, Lucas," Elon said, standing up and pacing the room. "You've got the brains, no doubt about that. But how do you handle a real-world problem? Something unplanned, unpredictable, and messy." Lucas tilted his head, intrigued. "I like messy problems," he said simply. Elon grinned. "Good. Let's see how much you like this one." Elon grabbed a marker and began sketching a rough diagram on the whiteboard. It showed a Mars habitat module, a resource rover, and a simulated colony map. "Imagine this," Elon began. "You're on Mars with a team of 6 people. A critical storm is heading your way. The solar panels will be useless for at least 48 hours, cutting off your main power source. The oxygen reserves can last 36 hours, but the backup systems are offline because of a software malfunction. You've got access to a single operational rover and 2 hours to make decisions before the storm hits. What do you do?" The room grew quiet as everyone turned to Lucas. His small face was serious, his blue eyes scanning the diagram with laser focus. Lucas approached the board, his marker poised mid-air. First, he began, I'd identify which life support systems are most vulnerable to power loss. Oxygen generation, obviously, but also water circulation. Both are critical for survival. He quickly circled the oxygen system and added a second circle around a water recycling unit. Next, I'd use the operational rover to transfer the oxygen reserves and water tanks to an insulated underground storage area. Mars's regolith can shield them from extreme temperatures during the storm, keeping the reserves stable for longer. Elon nodded, his expression neutral but clearly interested. And the backup systems? How do you fix the software malfunction with no outside help? Lucas smiled. I'd use the team's remaining power to reboot the control unit into a safe mode. That might not bring the entire system back online, but it could restore basic oxygen regulation. It's better to have partial functionality than none at all. Elon raised an eyebrow. And what if the reboot fails? Without missing a beat, Lucas replied, then I'd redirect power from non-essential systems, like habitat lighting, to manually power a smaller oxygen generator, even if it's only enough for temporary survival. The priority is buying time until the storm passes and solar power is restored. When Lucas finished, the room was silent. Elon leaned back in his chair, staring at the boy with a mix of astonishment and respect. Not bad, Elon said finally. Not bad at all. Lucas beamed, his confidence growing. Did I pass? Elon chuckled. Let's just say you're still in the game. But there's one more thing I need to see from you before I decide. Lucas's grin widened. What is it? Elon leaned forward, his tone growing serious. Lucas, you've shown me you can think through problems, but the real world doesn't always give you all the information you need. Sometimes, you have to rely on instincts, teamwork, and even a little failure. Tomorrow, I want you to join one of my engineering teams for a day. You'll work with them on a live project, under pressure. No parents, no safety nets. Just you and the team. Are you up for it? Lucas didn't hesitate. I'm ready. Elon smiled, sensing the boy's unwavering determination. Good. Let's see how you handle it. Lucas has passed every test so far, but working in a real-world environment is a whole new level of challenge. Will he thrive under pressure, or will he face his first taste of failure? Lucas woke up early the next morning, his mind racing with anticipation. For a 7-year-old, he seemed unusually calm, but inside, his heart pounded with excitement. Today wasn't about solving hypothetical problems or impressing people with knowledge. It was about proving he could thrive in the real world of innovation. His parents fussed over him during breakfast, but Lucas reassured them. I'll be fine, he said, sliding his glasses up his nose. This is what I've been waiting for. Elon's assistant arrived to escort Lucas to the engineering bay. As he waved goodbye to his parents, Lucas felt a mixture of nerves and exhilaration. This was it, the ultimate test. The engineering bay was buzzing with activity. Dozens of Tesla engineers worked on sleek prototypes, testing machinery, and analyzing data on oversized monitors. The air smelled faintly of metal and oil, and the hum of high-tech equipment filled the space. Lucas stepped inside, his eyes widening. He had seen videos of places like this, but standing here felt surreal. Lucas! Elon's voice called out from across the room. Lucas turned to see Elon walking toward him, flanked by a group of engineers who eyed the young prodigy with a mix of curiosity and skepticism. Meet your team for today, Elon said, gesturing to the group. This is Grace, Alex, and Miguel. They're some of our top engineers. They'll be working with you on a special project. Lucas stepped forward confidently. Nice to meet you, he said, shaking hands with each of them. Grace, a tall woman with sharp eyes and a friendly smile, knelt slightly to meet his gaze. You've got big shoes to fill, kid. Ready to dive in? Lucas nodded. Always. Elon led them to a table where a partially assembled robotic arm lay surrounded by tools and blueprints. This is the prototype for a modular robotic arm we're designing for Mars colonization, he explained. It's supposed to handle delicate tasks like repairing equipment and harvesting resources, but we've run into a problem. The motor control system keeps failing under extreme conditions. He turned to Lucas. Your task is to help the team identify the issue and propose a solution. You've got 6 hours. Good luck. And with that, Elon left the room, leaving Lucas alone with the engineers. At first, the team wasn't sure how to treat Lucas. He was a kid, after all. Miguel handed him a smaller set of blueprints. Why don't you start here, buddy? Just familiarize yourself with the design. But Lucas wasn't one to sit on the sidelines. I already reviewed the blueprints last night, he said, pulling out his tablet and showing detailed notes he had made. I think the issue might be in the thermal regulation system. Can we test that first? The engineers exchanged surprised glances. Grace smirked. All right, kid. Let's put your theory to the test. Lucas dove in, working alongside the team. He helped Miguel adjust the robotic arms wiring, suggested tweaks to the thermal regulator with Grace, and ran stress tests on the motor system with Alex. At one point, Grace handed him a soldering iron. Think you can handle this? Lucas took it without hesitation. Of course. Just show me where. As the hours ticked by, the team grew increasingly impressed. Lucas wasn't just spouting ideas. He was actively contributing, asking insightful questions, and offering solutions that even seasoned engineers hadn't considered. Finally, after hours of work, Lucas's hunch paid off. The thermal regulation system was indeed the culprit, and Lucas proposed a fix, adding a secondary cooling loop to stabilize the motor under extreme conditions. When the robotic arm passed the final stress test, the room erupted in cheers. Grace high-fived Lucas, while Miguel clapped him on the back. You did it, kid, Alex said, grinning. I think you just saved us weeks of work. Lucas beamed. It was a team effort. Elon re-entered the room just as the celebrations died down. So, he said, looking around, how did our human Google do? Grace stepped forward, her tone serious. He didn't just keep up, he led the way. This kid's the real deal. Elon smiled, but there was still a hint of mystery in his expression. Lucas, you've impressed me today, he said. But there's one last challenge I have in mind. Something even bigger than this. Are you ready for it? Elon Musk led Lucas and the team into a quiet conference room, the walls adorned with blueprints and digital renderings of SpaceX projects. On the large central screen, a live feed of Mars rotated slowly, its red surface glinting in the simulated sunlight. Elon turned to Lucas, his expression serious but intrigued. Lucas, what you accomplished today was no small feat, but I need to know if you're ready to tackle something that goes beyond engineering, something that tests your ability to think, lead, and inspire. Lucas adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing with determination. What's the challenge? Elon tapped a few buttons on the tablet in front of him, and the screen switched to a detailed schematic of a Martian colony. We're in the final stages of designing our first sustainable Mars habitat, Elon explained. This project has been years in the making, but there's a problem. The core algorithms for resource distribution are flawed. If they're not fixed, it could jeopardize the entire mission. Lucas's eyes lit up. You want me to help fix the algorithms? Elon shook his head. Not just help. I want you to lead the team working on it. Over the next 48 hours, you'll collaborate with some of the brightest minds in AI and resource management. Your task is to solve this problem permanently. The room fell silent as the gravity of Elon's words sank in. For the first time, Lucas hesitated. Lead the team, he repeated. But they're all adults, experienced engineers. Why would they listen to me? Elon crouched slightly to meet Lucas at eye level. Because you've earned it. You don't need to prove anything to them. They've seen what you're capable of. What matters now is whether you believe in yourself. Lucas's hesitation melted away, replaced by a steely resolve. I'll do it. Lucas was introduced to his new team, Dr. Evelyn Zhang, a renowned AI specialist, Professor Raj Patel, an expert in sustainable energy systems, and Marcus Reed, a veteran SpaceX engineer with years of experience in resource logistics. At first, the team was skeptical. Dr. Zhang raised an eyebrow. You're telling me our new team leader is a 7-year-old? Marcus chuckled. No offense, kid, but do you even know what a resource allocation matrix is? Lucas didn't miss a beat. It's a mathematical model used to optimize the distribution of limited resources. And if you're talking about Mars, I've already reviewed your latest matrix. The inefficiency comes from the redundant loops in your prioritization algorithm. The room fell silent. Dr. Zhang leaned forward, suddenly intrigued. Go on. Lucas walked to the board and began outlining his analysis, using technical jargon that left no room for doubt. By the time he finished, even Marcus looked impressed. All right, kid, Marcus said with a grin. You've got my attention. Lucas divided the task into 3 phases. 1. Identifying the bottlenecks, analyzing the existing algorithms to pinpoint inefficiencies. 2. Proposing a new framework, designing a more streamlined approach to resource allocation. 3. Simulated testing, running the new system through high-pressure scenarios to ensure reliability. Each team member was assigned specific tasks, but Lucas kept everyone focused, checking in frequently and offering suggestions. As the hours ticked by, the team faced multiple setbacks. One of the simulations crashed, causing hours of data loss. Marcus grew frustrated, slamming his fist on the table. This isn't going to work, he said. We're running out of time. Lucas remained calm. It's just a setback, he said. We can recover the data and rerun the simulation. But first, let's address the memory allocation error that caused the crash. Dr. Zhang nodded. He's right. Let's fix the root problem instead of panicking. Lucas's composure under pressure inspired the team, and they pushed forward with renewed determination. After 40 hours of near non-stop work, the team finally achieved a breakthrough. Lucas's new algorithm not only fixed the inefficiencies, but also increased resource optimization by 27%. When the final simulation ran flawlessly, the team erupted in applause. Dr. Zhang smiled at Lucas. You did it, Lucas. You led us to the solution. Elon entered the room as the team celebrated. He glanced at the results and nodded, clearly impressed. Lucas, he said, you've done more than solve a problem. You've shown what true leadership looks like. This isn't just about algorithms. It's about inspiring people to believe in what's possible. Lucas felt a swell of pride, but stayed humble. It was a team effort, he said. Elon grinned. And a great leader always knows that. Elon clapped Lucas on the shoulder. You've passed every test I've thrown at you. But there's one last thing I need to know. Lucas, what would you do if the impossible became possible? Lucas stared at Elon, the weight of his question lingering in the room. The 7-year-old genius, whose mind worked faster than most computers, hesitated for the first time. What do you mean by the impossible? Lucas asked cautiously. Elon leaned against the desk, arms crossed. I mean pushing boundaries. Thinking beyond what anyone has ever dared to attempt. You've proven you can solve problems and lead a team, but now I want to know, what's your impossible dream? What would you do if there were no limits? Lucas glanced at the holographic projection of Mars spinning slowly on the large screen. The reddish hue reflected in his wide eyes as ideas began to swirl in his mind. I'd make Mars more than a place to visit, Lucas said softly, almost to himself. I'd make it feel like home, a real home, where people aren't just surviving but thriving. With schools, parks, libraries, where kids like me could dream just as big as we do here on Earth. The room fell silent, the gravity of Lucas's vision stunning even the seasoned engineers. Elon's eyes twinkled. You're talking about terraforming on a scale we've only imagined in science fiction. Lucas nodded. Yes, but not just the planet. The people too. Building a culture, a community, a world where everyone has a purpose. Elon straightened up, the wheels clearly turning in his mind. All right, Lucas. If that's your dream, let's see how far you can take it. I want you to design the framework for a self-sustaining Martian city. Not just the technical infrastructure, but the societal elements too. How would you build an economy, establish education systems, and create a government? You'll have access to all our resources, but you'll be starting from scratch. Lucas blinked in surprise. You're serious? Dead serious, Elon said. This is your chance to show us what a truly human-centric Mars colony could look like. Lucas didn't waste a second. He dove into research, poring over books, articles, and even ancient history. He studied everything from the governance of the Roman Empire to the urban planning of modern cities like Tokyo and New York. He also interviewed people, engineers, sociologists, teachers, and even janitors, asking what they thought made a community thrive. "What do you love about your work?" he asked the janitor. The man shrugged, then smiled. "I like knowing I make this place clean and welcoming for everyone. It's a small thing, but it matters." Lucas jotted the answer down, understanding that no role was too small in a thriving community. Not everyone shared Lucas's enthusiasm. Marcus, the veteran engineer, was skeptical. "This is all nice in theory, but we're talking about a barren planet with limited resources. Do you really think you can create an economy out there?" Lucas didn't argue. Instead, he calmly replied, "Every economy starts with people trading something of value. Even in the harshest conditions, humans find ways to connect and contribute. Mars won't be any different. It'll just require creativity." His confidence began to win over even the doubters. One night, as Lucas stared at the glowing outline of Mars on his screen, inspiration struck. He sketched out a plan for the Martian core, a central hub where resources, ideas, and people would converge. The core would include 1. The exchange, a marketplace for goods and ideas. 2. The academy, a place for education and innovation. 3. The commons, a space for recreation, art, and community bonding. Lucas realized the core would be the heart of the colony, fostering both survival and creativity. 2 days later, Lucas presented his vision to Elon and the team. Using holographic models, he walked them through every detail, from the self-regulating energy grids to the decentralized decision-making system that would allow residents to govern themselves. When he finished, the room erupted into applause. Dr. Zhang wiped a tear from her eye. "Lucas, this isn't just a plan. It's a dream worth chasing." As the applause died down, Elon stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Lucas, you've impressed me more than I thought possible. But there's still one question left." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Are you ready to take the first step and actually go to Mars?" The room gasped. The room was silent, the air charged with anticipation. Lucas's heart pounded so loudly he was sure everyone could hear it. Elon's question echoed in his mind. "Are you ready to take the first step and actually go to Mars?" Lucas's initial reaction was disbelief. "Me? Go to Mars?" Elon nodded. "You've already shown you can think beyond your years. But thinking is one thing, Lucas. Doing is another. If you really want to shape the future of Mars, it starts with stepping onto its surface." "But I'm only 7, Lucas said, his voice trembling. Elon crouched to his eye level, his gaze steady. "Age doesn't define bravery, Lucas. Vision does. And you have more of it than most adults I know." The room erupted into murmurs. Some of the engineers looked at Elon in shock, others in admiration. Later that evening, Lucas sat with his parents in their modest living room. His mom looked worried, her hands clutching a mug of tea. His dad leaned forward, brows furrowed. "Lucas," his mom began gently, "this is a big decision. You're still a kid. You have your whole life ahead of you." "I know, Mom," Lucas said, "but this isn't just about me. It's about making a difference. It's about helping humanity." His dad sighed. "And what about the dangers? Mars isn't exactly a playground. The environment is harsh, and even with all the technology, things could go wrong." Lucas hesitated, then looked at his parents with determination. "If I can help build a future where families like ours could live without fear, isn't that worth it? Isn't that worth the risk?" Tears welled up in his mom's eyes. She reached out and pulled him into a hug. "You're so brave, Lucas. But whatever you decide, we'll stand by you." The next day, Lucas returned to SpaceX headquarters, his parents by his side. Elon greeted them with a smile, but his tone was serious. "Lucas, I understand this is a big decision, and I won't pressure you. If you choose to stay here on Earth, your work will still have an impact. But if you go, you'll be part of history." Lucas glanced at his parents. His mom gave him a small nod, her eyes glistening with tears. His dad placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "I'll do it," Lucas said finally, his voice firm. "I'll go to Mars." The announcement sent ripples through the media and scientific community. Headlines like, "The boy prodigy who will shape Mars," dominated the news. Some people were inspired by Lucas's bravery, while others criticized the decision to send a child to Mars. But Lucas didn't let the controversy distract him. He threw himself into intense preparation, learning everything he could about Mars's environment, survival tactics, and the technology he'd rely on. Dr. Zhang took on the role of his mentor, guiding him through simulations and tests. "You've got the mind for this, Lucas," she said during a particularly grueling training session. "Now you just need to trust your instincts." The day of departure arrived faster than anyone anticipated. Standing on the launch pad, Lucas felt the weight of his decision. He hugged his parents tightly, their embrace filled with unspoken words. "You make us so proud," his mom whispered. "Remember, son," his dad said, his voice cracking, "we're always with you, no matter how far away you are." Lucas boarded the spacecraft, his small frame dwarfed by the massive suit and helmet. As the countdown began, he glanced out the window, taking in the sight of Earth one last time. The engines roared to life, and Lucas felt the force of the launch push him back into his seat. His heart raced, not with fear, but with excitement. This was it, the beginning of something extraordinary. As the spacecraft broke free of Earth's atmosphere, Lucas stared at the infinite expanse of space. For the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of his journey. Hours into the voyage, an alert sounded in the cabin. Lucas looked around, his stomach nodding. "What's going on?" he asked. One of the crew members turned to him, their face pale. "We've encountered an anomaly. Something's wrong with the navigation system." Lucas's mind raced. This wasn't in the simulations. Could this be his first real test? The alarm's shrill sound cut through the spacecraft like a blade. Lucas's heart pounded as the red lights blinked rhythmically across the cabin. The anomaly wasn't just a minor hiccup, it was a potential crisis. "Navigation is offline," one of the crew members shouted, scanning the control panel. The veteran pilot, Commander Harris, barked orders to the team as his hands flew over the controls. "Switch to manual override. Stabilize our trajectory," Harris ordered. Lucas, still strapped into his seat, glanced at the blinking lights. He couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial was being overlooked. "Lucas, stay calm," Dr. Zhang said from the seat beside him. "We trained for situations like this. Let the crew handle it." But Lucas couldn't stay calm. His mind raced through the hours of preparation, simulations, and data he had consumed. Something about the blinking pattern of the alerts seemed familiar. "Wait," Lucas suddenly called out, his voice cutting through the chaos. The crew turned to him, startled. Commander Harris narrowed his eyes. "Kid, this isn't the time for interruptions. But I think I know what's wrong," Lucas insisted, unbuckling his harness and scrambling toward the nearest control panel. Harris moved to block him. "This isn't a game, Lucas. Lives are at stake." "Exactly," Lucas replied, locking eyes with the commander. "That's why you need to listen to me." Harris hesitated. The room was tense, the weight of the decision heavy. Finally, he stepped aside. "All right, genius. Show us what you've got." Lucas's fingers hovered over the console as he studied the data streams. His sharp eyes caught something the others had missed, a subtle glitch in the star tracker's alignment algorithms. "The navigation system isn't broken," Lucas explained, his voice steady. "It's misreading our position because of interference from the solar flare we passed through earlier." Dr. Zhang leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowing. "That's possible. But how do we fix it?" Lucas pointed to a set of manual controls. "We need to recalibrate the star tracker by temporarily disabling the autopilot and aligning it manually. I read about this exact scenario in one of the SpaceX technical guides." Commander Harris looked skeptical. "If you're wrong, we could drift off course indefinitely. And if we don't try, we're already drifting," Lucas countered. With Harris's reluctant nod, Lucas set to work. His small hands flew over the controls, inputting coordinates and adjusting settings. The crew watched in silence, the tension palpable. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a soft hum, the navigation system came back online. The blinking red lights switched to a steady green, and the spacecraft's trajectory corrected itself. Cheers erupted from the crew. Harris clapped Lucas on the back, a grudging smile on his face. "You've earned your seat on this mission, kid." Lucas grinned, a mix of relief and pride washing over him. That evening, as the spacecraft glided smoothly through the void of space, the crew gathered in the common area. Lucas was the center of attention, his earlier actions earning him newfound respect. "You really saved us back there," Dr. Zhang said, handing him a packet of rehydrated apple slices. Lucas shrugged, but his eyes sparkled. "I just did what anyone would have done." Commander Harris chuckled. "Not anyone could have done that. You've got the brains, kid. Now let's see if you've got the guts for what's ahead." The camaraderie in the room was palpable, the crew's initial doubts about Lucas replaced with admiration. For the first time, Lucas felt like he truly belonged. As the crew prepared to rest, Lucas stared out of the observation window, mesmerized by the vast expanse of stars. But his sense of wonder was interrupted by a gnawing feeling. Something wasn't right. "Lucas?" Dr. Zhang's voice startled him. He turned to her. "What if this was just the beginning? What if there's something bigger waiting for us?" Dr. Zhang placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Then we'll face it. Together." But as she walked away, Lucas couldn't shake the unease. Deep down, he knew the journey to Mars would be far more dangerous than anyone anticipated. Suddenly, the spacecraft's external sensors detected an unknown object moving toward them at high speed. "Unidentified object approaching." Harris's voice boomed through the intercom. Lucas's eyes widened as the radar displayed a massive, irregular shape. "What is that?" No one had an answer. The crew scrambled to assess the threat, but Lucas felt the same pull of intuition that had guided him earlier. This wasn't just a random anomaly. It was something else, something that could change everything. The spacecraft's control room was a flurry of activity as alarms blared, and the unidentified object loomed closer. The once celebratory mood had vanished, replaced by sharp focus and underlying fear. "It's huge," whispered Dr. Zhang, her eyes fixed on the radar screen. The object's irregular shape was unlike any asteroid or debris they'd encountered before. Lucas leaned closer to the screen. "It's not behaving like a natural object," he murmured. "Its trajectory, it's too precise." Commander Harris barked orders. "Activate shields and ready the evasive maneuvers. We're not taking any chances." "But what if it's not hostile?" Lucas interjected. Harris glared at him. "We don't have the luxury of guessing, kid. If it's a threat, we deal with it." The radar beeped steadily as the object closed the distance. Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just space debris or a random hazard. He glanced at the external camera feed, which showed a shadowy mass against the backdrop of stars. "Commander, can we magnify the visual feed?" Lucas asked. Harris hesitated but nodded. "Do it, Ramirez," he said to the communications officer. The screen flickered before zooming in on the object. It was metallic, with intricate, almost organic patterns etched into its surface. The crew gasped. "That's not an asteroid," Dr. Zhang said softly. "That's engineered." The room fell silent as the weight of her words sank in. If the object was engineered, it meant one thing. It wasn't natural. Could it be alien technology? Ramirez asked, his voice tinged with awe. "Or some secret project we weren't briefed on," another crew member suggested. Harris raised a hand to quiet them. "Speculation isn't going to help. Our priority is the safety of this ship and its crew." But Lucas couldn't stay silent. "We have to try and make contact," he said firmly. Harris turned to him, incredulous. "Contact? Are you out of your mind? For all we know, that thing could destroy us." "It hasn't made any aggressive moves," Lucas argued. "What if it's an opportunity? Something that could change everything we know about the universe?" The crew exchanged uncertain glances. Dr. Zhang stepped forward. "Lucas might be right. We should at least gather more data before deciding." After a tense debate, Harris reluctantly agreed. "Fine, we'll attempt a low-level scan. But if that thing so much as twitches, we're out of here." The room buzzed with nervous energy as the crew prepared the scanning equipment. Lucas watched anxiously, his heart pounding. The scan began, emitting a faint hum that reverberated through the ship. The object's surface shimmered on the monitor, revealing complex layers of what appeared to be energy conduits and interlocking panels. "What is that?" Ramirez muttered, his fingers flying over the keyboard. Before anyone could answer, the object pulsed with a soft, golden light. The light wasn't random. It flickered in a rhythmic pattern. Lucas's eyes widened as he recognized the sequence. "It's a code," he exclaimed. Dr. Zhang leaned closer. "A code? What kind of code?" "Morse," Lucas replied, his voice trembling with excitement. "It's sending a message." The room fell silent as Lucas began to translate the flashes. "H-E-L-P," he read aloud. "Help? It's asking for help?" Harris said, his skepticism giving way to confusion. Lucas nodded. "It's not hostile. It's in distress." Harris rubbed his temples, clearly torn. "This is way above my pay grade. If we engage, we're risking the mission. And if we don't?" Lucas countered. "We might miss the chance to make the greatest discovery in human history." Dr. Zhang added, "Commander, we came here to explore the unknown. This could be the most important thing we'll ever do." After a long pause, Harris sighed. "All right, we'll approach cautiously. But the moment this turns south, we're out of here. Understood?" The crew nodded, and Lucas felt a surge of determination. The spacecraft inched closer to the object, its golden light pulsing steadily. Lucas sat at the edge of his seat, his mind racing with possibilities. "Lucas, stay focused," Dr. Zhang said. "This is uncharted territory." "I know," Lucas replied, his voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside him. As the spacecraft came within range, a panel on the object's surface began to shift, revealing what looked like an entrance. Commander?" Ramirez said, his voice shaky. "I think it's inviting us in." The crew stared at the screen, their faces a mix of awe and apprehension. Lucas's heart pounded as he turned to Harris. "We have to go inside. This could be the key to everything." Harris hesitated, the weight of the decision visible on his face. Finally, he nodded. "Gear up. We're going in." As the crew prepared for the mission, Lucas couldn't help but feel that this was the moment he had been waiting for his entire life. But deep down, he knew that whatever lay inside the object would test them in ways they couldn't imagine. What do you think is inside the mysterious object? Is it a life form, advanced technology, or something completely unexpected? Share your theories below. The atmosphere in the control room was tense, the hum of the spacecraft's engines filling the silence as everyone geared up for the unprecedented mission. Lucas's pulse raced, his mind a whirl of excitement and fear. He was about to walk into the unknown. "Suit up," Commander Harris ordered, his voice steady but laced with an undercurrent of anxiety. The crew moved quickly, donning their pressure suits, each moment drawing them closer to the strange, mysterious object that had appeared out of nowhere. Lucas felt the weight of the helmet on his head and the tightness of his suit as he prepared for the most important mission of his life. His thoughts raced. What was inside? What had sent the distress signal? Was it a message of peace or something more ominous? "Everyone clear on the plan?" Harris asked, his eyes scanning the crew. "We approach cautiously, gather data, and stay on alert. There's no room for error." Lucas nodded, trying to steady his breathing. The ship's crew was divided on the decision to enter, but the curiosity and the undeniable pull of the unknown were too strong to resist. He couldn't back down now. The shuttle detached from the main spacecraft with a soft hum. Lucas's heart thudded in his chest as they drifted toward the object, the vastness of space surrounding them. The mysterious ship, or whatever it was, towered before them, glowing softly like a beacon in the darkness. "What do you see, Lucas?" Dr. Zhang asked, her voice crackling through the comms. Lucas leaned forward, peering out of the small window. "It's enormous. I've never seen anything like it. There's a structure, like a door or an opening. It's almost like it's made for us to enter. Do you think it's safe?" Harris's voice came through the radio, his tone still skeptical. Lucas hesitated, then answered, "I don't know, but I think we have to find out." The shuttle's engines powered down as they approached the opening. The metallic surface of the object was smooth, almost unnaturally so, and shimmered in the dim light of space. The air felt charged with an unknown energy, and Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, even though no one was visible. As the shuttle came closer, a panel on the object's surface shifted, sliding open with a soft, almost welcoming hum. A deep, resonating sound echoed from within, and the crew instinctively reached for their weapons. But no one moved to take a shot. No hostile actions. Just silence. The opening revealed a narrow, sleek hallway leading into the heart of the object. The walls were lined with intricate designs that pulsed with the same golden light they had seen on the exterior. It was beautiful, almost mesmerizing, yet unsettling in its perfect symmetry. "Stay close," Harris ordered, leading the way. "Lucas, you're with me." Lucas's boots echoed softly against the metallic floor as they stepped into the hallway. The walls seemed to breathe, the strange light shifting in rhythm with their movements. "This is unreal," Lucas murmured under his breath. The hallway stretched ahead, twisting slightly as it seemed to expand endlessly. The group moved forward cautiously, each step taken with deliberate care. They were crossing into uncharted territory, and every instinct told Lucas that they were far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Suddenly, the hallway narrowed, and the group halted. Ahead, a large, circular door stood, its surface shimmering like liquid metal. At its center was a glowing symbol, pulsing with an otherworldly energy. "I've never seen anything like this before," Dr. Zhang whispered. "Is that a door? How do we open it?" Lucas stepped forward, drawn to the symbol. It resembled a series of interlocking circles, each one surrounded by smaller, intricate designs. It was unlike any language or form of communication he had ever seen. As he reached out instinctively, his hand brushed against the surface, and the door slowly began to open, as if it had been waiting for him. The door slid open with a low groan, revealing a vast chamber beyond. The air was thick with a strange, metallic scent, and the walls of the room were lined with glowing symbols. It looked like a control center of some kind, but it was unlike anything Lucas had ever imagined. Giant screens flickered on the walls, displaying swirling data and incomprehensible symbols. In the center of the room stood what appeared to be a control panel, but unlike anything from Earth. It was alive, organic, with pulsating lights and tendrils extending from it, connecting to the walls like veins. The air seemed to hum with energy, and Lucas could feel the weight of the unknown pressing down on him. This is it," Dr. Zhang said, her voice filled with awe. "This is beyond anything we could have ever dreamed of." Suddenly, the lights in the room flared brighter, and the entire chamber seemed to come to life. The tendrils connected to the walls, forming intricate patterns of light and shadow. The room pulsed with an energy that made the crew's skin tingle. As the crew stood in stunned silence, the screen in the center flickered, displaying an image. Lucas leaned in closer, his breath catching in his throat. The image was of a human figure, but its features were distorted, as if it was trying to communicate something impossible to understand. "Is that a person?" Harris whispered. Before anyone could answer, the figure on the screen seemed to move, its mouth opening as if to speak. But instead of sound, a strange sequence of flashing symbols appeared on the screen. This is a message," Lucas said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's a warning." Just as Lucas began to analyze the symbols, the room's energy shifted, and the door they had entered through slammed shut with a thunderous crash. The chamber grew darker, the pulsing lights fading as the symbols on the walls began to shift rapidly. "Get to the shuttle," Harris ordered, his voice tense. "Something's not right. We need to leave now." The crew began to back toward the door, but Lucas was frozen in place, his eyes locked on the screen as the symbols began to form a coherent pattern. Before he could make sense of it, the chamber erupted with a blinding light. And then, everything went black. The blackness was overwhelming. It felt as though the entire universe had swallowed them whole, leaving them suspended in nothingness. Lucas's body felt weightless, his limbs numb, as though he was no longer in control of them. It took a moment before Lucas could feel anything again. The hum of the air, the slight pressure on his body, the subtle vibrations from the shuttle. His eyes fluttered open, and for a split second, he didn't know where he was. His helmet displayed no external signal. The mission, the object, the strange symbols. It was all a blur, as if reality itself had been twisted and altered. Panic began to creep in, but he pushed it away, focusing on his breathing. "Lucas, you alive?" Harris's voice broke through the fog, snapping him back to reality. He blinked rapidly, his vision slowly clearing. The control room was gone. Instead, they were back in the shuttle, but something was wrong. The usual hum of the shuttle's systems was muted, and the screens around them flickered erratically, flashing images of the chamber they had just left. "What happened?" Lucas asked, his voice barely more than a whisper. "We don't know," Harris said, his tone grim. "One minute, we were trying to leave, and the next, we're back here. The shuttle systems are scrambled. It's like we were pulled somewhere, like we didn't leave at all." Dr. Zhang turned to the console, tapping at the screen with frantic urgency. "We've lost all connection to the mothership. There's no communication with Earth. We're on our own." Lucas's mind raced. They had come so far, and now they were trapped, somewhere unknown, beyond the reach of their home. "What about the symbols?" Lucas asked, still shaken. "What do they mean? Was it a warning?" Dr. Zhang shook her head, clearly frustrated. "I don't know. But whatever it was more than just an alien warning. It felt deliberate, like it was meant for us." Harris let out a long breath, his hands gripping the controls. "Whatever it is, we need to figure it out fast. We're not getting out of here until we understand what's happening." As if in response to Harris's words, the shuttle's systems flickered again, and the walls around them began to pulse faintly. The flashing symbols on the screens suddenly rearranged, forming new patterns. It was as though the object they had encountered was communicating with them again, this time through their own ship systems. "Wait," Lucas murmured, leaning forward. "Look at this." The symbols on the screen were shifting at an astonishing rate. They didn't make sense at first, but Lucas noticed something strange. Some of the symbols were starting to resemble words, not in any known language, but in a pattern of geometry and light. "It's a message," he said, his voice shaking with awe. "It's telling us something." Harris gave him a sidelong glance. "What kind of message?" "I think it's a map," Lucas said, excitement and fear swirling in his chest. "But it's not just a map of where we are. It's pointing us somewhere." The symbols stopped changing abruptly, freezing into a final pattern. A map, as Lucas had guessed, but unlike anything human-made. It was a set of coordinates, but not in any system that existed on Earth. "This is insane," Dr. Zhang whispered. "We need to figure out where this leads. If it's showing us something, we can't ignore it. But how do we even know it's real?" Harris asked, his skepticism clear. "How do we know we're not just hallucinating or losing our minds?" Lucas took a deep breath. "We don't, but we also don't have a choice. If we don't follow this, we'll never get out of here. Whatever that thing was, it's still controlling us, and we have to go to it if we have any hope of getting answers." Harris didn't respond immediately, his eyes narrowing as he glanced between the flickering screens. Finally, he sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right," he said reluctantly, "but we're going in with our eyes wide open. We don't know what we're dealing with." The shuttle moved slowly, its engines barely humming as it followed the coordinates displayed on the screen. The strange map remained steady, its glowing symbols casting an eerie light on the shuttle's interior. The team moved in tense silence, each person lost in their thoughts. Lucas felt a sense of urgency, a need to know the truth, but he also felt the weight of the unknown pressing on him. Was this a trap? Was there something waiting for them on the other side? Dr. Zhang broke the silence. "What if this is all part of some test? What if they want us to see something? Something we're not supposed to understand?" "Then we need to understand it," Lucas said firmly, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at him. "We're not leaving without answers." As they neared the final destination, the ship began to shudder, the controls becoming more difficult to manage. Something was pulling at them, like an invisible force, and it was getting stronger. "Something's wrong," Harris said, his voice strained. "We're losing control." The shuttle jerked violently, throwing everyone off balance. The flashing lights on the consoles turned chaotic, and Lucas struggled to keep his grip on the seat as the ship was thrown into disarray. "Get us out of here!" Dr. Zhang screamed, her voice panicked. "We need to turn back." But it was too late. The force, whatever it was, had locked onto them completely. The shuttle spiraled toward the unknown coordinates at an uncontrollable speed, hurtling them forward deeper into the mystery. Suddenly, everything stopped. The shuttle hovered in place, suspended in the vastness of space. But there was something new in front of them. A structure. A massive, metallic form, shaped like an archway, glowing with an intense light. The same symbol they had seen earlier was emblazoned on its surface. It was enormous, far beyond anything they could have imagined. And as they stared at it, the door opened, beckoning them inside. The shuttle floated motionless in space, drawn inexplicably to the colossal archway that loomed before them. Its surface shimmered with an unnatural, pulsating light, and the closer they got, the more it seemed to call out to them, as if the very structure had a consciousness of its own. For a long moment, no one moved. The hum of the shuttle's systems had ceased, replaced by an eerie silence that filled the cabin. Lucas, Harris, and Dr. Zhang stared at the glowing archway, each processing the impossibility of the situation. "This isn't real," Harris muttered under his breath, shaking his head. This can't be happening." But Lucas could feel it, a pull deep within him, an unspoken force that urged them forward. His eyes were fixed on the gateway, and in that moment, he realized that there was no going back. Dr. Zhang's voice broke the stillness, calm but filled with uncertainty. "This, whatever it is, it's more than just alien technology. It's something else. It feels ancient, like it's been here far longer than we have." Harris clenched his fists, his usual bravado gone. "We're just supposed to go through it? Just like that? After everything we've been through?" Lucas's gaze remained fixed on the shimmering arch. "We don't have a choice. We came here for answers. Maybe this is where we get them." There was no dramatic sound, no sudden rush of air as the shuttle moved toward the arch. It simply happened. The shuttle was drawn toward it by an unseen force. The massive, glowing structure grew larger as they approached, until it consumed their entire view. The air felt dense, heavy with tension, as though the universe itself was holding its breath. Then, the shuttle passed through the archway. Everything went still. No vibrations, no hum of engines. The stars outside vanished as if the shuttle had entered a different dimension altogether. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. The familiar, comforting view of space was gone, replaced by a vast, dark expanse that stretched infinitely in every direction. Dr. Zhang's voice cracked the silence. "Where are we? What just happened?" In front of them was a world unlike any they had ever seen. The shuttle had landed on a large, rocky surface, craggy terrain that seemed to pulse with energy, its dark gray stone shimmering faintly under the glowing archway. There were no stars in the sky, no sun, only a constant, dim light emanating from the structure that hovered above them. The air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, metallic and almost otherworldly. "Is this another planet?" Harris whispered in awe, his voice full of disbelief. "I don't think so," Lucas said, scanning the surroundings. "It feels different. Like we're not just in space anymore. Like we've crossed into something else entirely." Before anyone could respond, a low hum filled the air, coming from the archway itself. The shimmering surface rippled, and with it, a new symbol materialized. An intricate geometric pattern, glowing in sync with the pulse of the structure. "That's the symbol from the shuttle," Dr. Zhang said, pointing to the glowing pattern. "It's like it's communicating with us." The symbol shifted once more, and suddenly, a booming voice echoed through the shuttle's speakers, its source unknown, but unmistakably clear. "You have crossed the threshold. Now, the test begins." A chill ran down Lucas's spine. The voice was not human. It was something far beyond their understanding. The words were laced with a sense of inevitability, like they had been chosen, perhaps even predestined, for whatever lay ahead. "What does that mean?" Harris muttered, his hand tightening around the controls. "I don't know," Lucas admitted, his pulse racing. "But I think we have no choice but to face it." The ground beneath the shuttle began to tremble. The once still air now vibrated with energy. The archway pulsed again, and then, without warning, a path appeared, stretching out into the distance. It was narrow, winding, but it beckoned them forward. "This is it," Dr. Zhang said, her voice filled with a mix of awe and fear. "The test is in the journey we have to go through." Lucas nodded, though uncertainty churned in his stomach. There was no way to know what awaited them on this path, but turning back wasn't an option. They had come too far. The shuttle moved again, but now it was guided by an invisible hand, as though the path had been preordained for them. The rocky surface beneath them began to smooth out, and the surroundings started to shift. The once dark expanse gave way to a glowing horizon, and in the distance, the outline of a massive structure began to take shape. It was impossible to tell how far away it was, but it felt immense, far larger than anything they had seen before. The air grew heavier as they approached, and Lucas could feel the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. "Is that the end of the test?" Harris asked, his voice full of wonder. "I think it's just the beginning," Lucas replied. Suddenly, the air shifted again. A presence, unseen but palpable, seemed to settle around them. It was as if the very atmosphere was watching, waiting for their next move. The symbol from the shuttle had been replaced by something new, a series of shifting lines, like a puzzle that was being pieced together before their eyes. "Something's not right," Dr. Zhang said quietly. "We're not alone." Lucas's heart raced as the presence grew stronger. It wasn't hostile, but it was something far older, far more powerful than they could comprehend. Then, as they reached the structure, the path before them stopped, and a massive doorway materialized. The ground beneath them hummed with energy, and Lucas knew, without a doubt, that whatever lay behind that door was going to change everything. As they approached the doorway, it opened on its own, revealing a vast chamber inside. The light from the archway streamed in, illuminating what lay within. And standing in the center of the room was a figure, tall, shrouded in a flowing cloak, with no discernible features. The figure raised a hand, and suddenly, a sharp, electrifying jolt coursed through the shuttle, knocking all of them to the floor. "Welcome," the voice from the figure said, its tone like the rustle of wind through dry leaves. "You have arrived. But are you truly ready for what lies beyond?" The shuttle lurched as the figure's voice echoed around them, filling the chamber with an unsettling presence. The vibrations in the air grew stronger, resonating within Lucas's bones. He could feel the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders, as though the fate of their entire journey hinged on what would come next. The figure before them stood unmoving, its presence both foreboding and somehow familiar. There was no defining characteristic, no face, no eyes. It was a silhouette of darkness, seemingly carved from the very fabric of the strange realm they had entered. The cloak it wore rippled as if caught in an invisible wind, its edges fading into the dim light. Harris, ever the skeptic, was the first to break the silence. "What do you want from us?" The figure's hand lowered slowly, but there was no movement, no indication that it had heard Harris. Instead, the low hum of energy in the air intensified, and Lucas felt a chill run down his spine. The figure seemed to be waiting for them to make the next move, as though its very existence depended on their response. "We were sent here," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the unease swelling within him. "We need to know what this place is, what you are." The voice of the figure did not come from its mouth, but rather from all around them, as if the words were woven into the air itself. "I am the guardian of the threshold," it intoned, its voice distant and unyielding. "And you, children of Earth, have come seeking answers. But you must first prove your worth." The chamber shifted. The walls rippled as though they were made of liquid glass, revealing strange symbols and patterns moving across their surface. The air around them thickened with a strange, tangible tension, as if the very space was alive with purpose. "You seek knowledge," the guardian's voice continued, "but knowledge is not given freely. It must be earned. The path ahead is fraught with challenges that will test your resolve, your intelligence, and your very will to survive. Only by passing these trials will you be deemed worthy of the truth." Dr. Zhang took a step forward, her curiosity getting the best of her. "What kind of trials? How do we pass them?" A deep silence followed her question, stretching uncomfortably. The figure raised its hand again, and suddenly, A series of floating spheres appeared around them, glowing with an otherworldly light. The spheres hovered in the air, swirling and shifting, their movements unpredictable. Without warning, one of the spheres shot forward, dissolving into a translucent doorway that opened before them. Beyond it was a dark, twisting maze of corridors and sharp turns, stretching into an endless, shadowy expanse. "This is the first trial," the Guardian's voice echoed, its presence still looming over them. "Find the heart of the labyrinth. But beware, for what you seek is not what you will find." Harris stepped back, his face paling. "A maze? That's it? We're supposed to walk through some dark hallways and figure it out?" The Guardian's voice remained cold and detached. "It is not the maze you must fear. It is your mind. The labyrinth will reflect your deepest doubts, your darkest fears. Only by confronting them will you succeed." The doorway to the labyrinth shimmered and closed, leaving them standing in the chamber, with only the echoing hum of energy in the air. Dr. Zhang looked at Lucas, her face a mask of determination. "We can do this. We have no choice." Without waiting for a response, she stepped forward, the others following her into the darkness. The moment they crossed the threshold, the labyrinth's walls seemed to shift around them, the space warping and stretching in ways that made it impossible to gauge the distance or direction. "Stay close," Lucas said, trying to keep the fear out of his voice. But the maze was already working against them. As they moved forward, the walls twisted and turned, reshaping themselves with each step. The air grew colder, and the pressure in their heads intensified, as if something was watching them, waiting for them to make a mistake. As they ventured deeper into the maze, the atmosphere grew oppressive. The walls seemed to pulse, whispering faint, unintelligible words, and each twist and turn felt like a step further into the unknown. Every corner they turned revealed nothing but more of the same, until suddenly everything stopped. The passage before them split in two, and the air shimmered with an unfamiliar energy. At the center of the split stood a glowing, ethereal figure. It was a reflection of Lucas himself, a younger version, perhaps a child, standing with wide eyes and an innocent smile. "Which path will you choose?" the figure asked, its voice a perfect echo of Lucas's own. Harris stopped in his tracks. What is this? Why is it showing us this?" Dr. Zhang squinted at the figure. "It's not real. It's a projection. This is part of the test." But Lucas could feel something deep within him stir. A recognition, a feeling that this image was more than just a reflection. It was a memory, a part of his past, something he had long buried. His heart raced as the figure's expression shifted, its smile turning into a look of deep sadness. "You've always been afraid of failure," the projection of Lucas whispered. "Afraid of disappointing everyone who believes in you." Lucas froze. The words cut through him, striking deep at a fear he had never fully acknowledged. His mind raced. His family, his friends, the expectations placed on him. He had always been the perfect son, the brilliant student, the one who could never fail. Lucas began, his voice trembling. "I'm not afraid of failing," but the figure only shook its head. "You've never truly faced that fear. It's what has held you back your entire life. Until you let go of that fear, you cannot move forward." The walls of the labyrinth seemed to close in on him. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, pressing in on his thoughts. "You must accept that failure is not the end," the figure continued, its voice softening. "It's only another part of the journey." Lucas stood there for what felt like an eternity, grappling with the truth of the figure's words. Could he truly accept failure? Was he ready to face the vulnerability he had spent his whole life avoiding? Finally, with a deep breath, Lucas stepped forward, leaving the projection of himself behind. "I choose the path forward," he said, his voice steady. "I choose to move beyond my fears." In an instant, the image vanished, and the labyrinth's walls began to shift again. The path ahead cleared, and the oppressive weight that had been pressing on him seemed to lift. "Well done," the Guardian's voice echoed, the words distant but filled with approval. "You have passed the first trial." As the path opened up, the labyrinth vanished into the distance, revealing an even greater challenge ahead. In front of them stood another doorway, this one larger, more imposing, with strange symbols etched into its surface. Beyond it, a bright light shone. "You are close now," the guardian intoned, "but the greatest challenge lies ahead. Will you be ready?" The doorway before them loomed, its massive frame adorned with intricate symbols that pulsed faintly in the dim light. The air around it seemed alive, vibrating with unseen energy, and the bright light beyond it beckoned like the promise of something monumental. But despite the pull of curiosity, Lucas felt a deep sense of unease. The guardian's voice echoed once more in the chamber, its tone solemn. "Beyond this door lies the final trial, the heart of the labyrinth, where you will face the culmination of your journey. But beware, what you find there will test not just your strength, but your very spirit. Only those who confront their truest selves will survive." "Great," Harris muttered under his breath. "More tests. Just what we needed." Lucas ignored him, his mind racing. The last trial had been difficult enough, but this? The heart of the labyrinth, the final trial? What could it mean? He had already faced his fear of failure, but this felt different, more personal, more dangerous. Dr. Zhang stepped forward, her determination unwavering. "We have to keep going. This is what we came for." Without waiting for a response, she pushed open the massive door, and the group stepped into the next trial. As they crossed the threshold, the bright light engulfed them, and for a moment, they were disoriented. The world around them shifted, the air crackling with an energy that made their skin tingle. When their vision cleared, they found themselves standing in a vast, open space. An arena of sorts, though its dimensions were impossible to comprehend. The floor beneath them was smooth and black, like polished obsidian, stretching endlessly into the horizon. There was no sky, no walls, no sense of time or place, just the infinite void surrounding them. In the distance, a single figure stood motionless, its back to them. Harris scoffed. "A figure in the middle of nowhere? Really? This is the final trial?" But Lucas was too focused to respond. Something about this space felt wrong. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but the atmosphere was thick with an unsettling silence. The figure slowly turned to face them, revealing a form shrouded in shadow. Its face was indistinct, a blur of shapes and features, as though it was both present and absent at once. "You have come far," the figure said, its voice distant and echoing, reverberating through the infinite space. "But this is the final test, the trial of reflection. To pass, you must face your greatest weakness, your darkest fear, and overcome it. You will see yourself as you truly are." "Is this a joke?" Harris shouted, anger lacing his voice. "We're supposed to fight ourselves?" The figure did not respond to Harris's outburst. Instead, it raised a hand, and the world around them began to warp. The ground beneath them trembled, and the void seemed to twist, bending the space in unnatural ways. Suddenly, the scene shifted, and before Lucas stood a mirror, tall and reflective. The glass shimmered, showing him his own image, but there was something different about it. In the reflection, he was older, wearier, with a look of deep regret in his eyes. "Do you see?" the figure's voice whispered. "This is what you are destined to become if you cannot face the truth of your own soul." Lucas recoiled, his heart pounding in his chest. The man in the reflection wasn't him, was it? It looked like him, but older, hardened, broken. The weight of failure, of missed opportunities, of dreams crushed under the weight of expectations. A man who had never truly confronted his fear of failure, who had spent his life running from it. "That's not me," Lucas muttered, stepping back, trying to shake off the image. "It can't be." But the reflection only smiled sadly, its eyes filled with an emptiness that unsettled him even more. "It is you," the reflection said softly, "the version of you that you fear becoming, the version that never took the risks, never challenged the world, never let go of his fear." The air around him grew heavy. His knees felt weak, and his throat tightened. He could hear his own voice, his past self, whispering to him, urging him to back away from the truth. But deep down, he knew that he couldn't escape this reflection. It was his greatest fear, staring back at him. "Do you fear failure so much The figure's voice rang out, that you would let it define your future? Do you fear it so deeply that you would sacrifice everything to avoid it? The image of the older Lucas in the mirror reached out as though to touch him, its hand hovering just inches from the glass. Lucas could feel his pulse quickening, the weight of the moment pressing on him from all sides. This was it, the culmination of everything he had feared. His entire life had been shaped by the desire to avoid failure at all costs. But now, it was clear. If he didn't confront this fear, if he didn't accept failure as part of the journey, he would never move forward. Lucas closed his eyes, gathering every ounce of strength he had left. "I won't let fear control me anymore," he whispered to himself. Slowly, he stepped toward the mirror, reaching out to touch the cold surface. The moment his fingers made contact, the reflection shattered into 1,000 pieces, scattering like shards of glass in the wind. The image of failure, the image of himself, dissolved, leaving behind only the empty void. The figure in front of him remained silent, but its presence seemed less imposing now. The trial was over. The void began to clear, and the space around them returned to its normal state, the oppressive weight lifting from their shoulders. The guardian's voice echoed once more, this time with a note of approval. "You have passed the final trial," the guardian intoned. "You have faced your greatest fear and overcome it. You are worthy of the truth." But just as the chamber began to stabilize, a new presence appeared. An ominous shadow at the edge of their vision. The guardian's voice faltered slightly. "You have succeeded, but there is one final choice to make. Will you accept what is coming, or will you turn away?" The atmosphere in the chamber shifted once more. The air, which had cleared after the shattering of the mirror, now grew thick again, but this time with something far more ominous. At the edge of the void, the shadow that had appeared was no longer a mere silhouette. It began to take shape, a towering figure, cloaked in a dark, flowing robe, its face hidden in shadow. For a moment, everything was still. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, his mind racing to comprehend what was happening. He had passed the final trial. He had confronted his fears. But this was something new. Harris stepped forward, his face tense. "What now? We've completed everything, haven't we?" The figure didn't answer immediately. Instead, it spoke in a voice that was both cold and familiar, echoing as though from the depths of time itself. "You have proven your worth, Lucas," the voice rumbled. "But the journey does not end with the trials. The greatest challenge lies ahead. You must choose. Will you embrace the truth you've discovered, or will you turn your back on it?" Dr. Zhang, ever the pragmatist, narrowed her eyes. "What do you mean, embrace the truth?" "We've learned all we need to know." But the figure remained silent, as if it knew something they did not. And the air around them grew heavier, charged with an electric tension. Without warning, a brilliant light flashed, momentarily blinding them. When the light faded, the void had changed once again. Before them now stood two paths, each stretching off into the distance. One path glowed with a soft, inviting light, warm, golden, and full of promise. The other was dark, shrouded in shadows that seemed to move and swirl, as if it was alive. "You must choose your path," the figure spoke again, its voice more insistent this time. "One path leads to your destiny, the life you were meant to lead. The other will lead to destruction, a path of regret and unfulfilled potential." Lucas stared at the two paths, feeling the weight of the decision settle on his shoulders. The golden path seemed safe, the clear choice, but the darkness called to him in a way he couldn't explain. "I've faced my fear," Lucas said quietly, his voice trembling with uncertainty. "But now, I'm faced with this. How do I know which path is right?" Harris, always the skeptic, shook his head. "This is ridiculous. How can we be sure? It's all just a game, isn't it? A test to mess with our heads?" But Lucas didn't respond to Harris. His mind was elsewhere, torn between the two options. The golden path offered hope, security, a future where he could thrive, free of the shadows that had once haunted him. But the dark path, it felt like a challenge. A test, but not just a test of his strength. It was something more profound, something that demanded sacrifice. The figure stepped forward, its form looming over them. The truth is, Lucas, both paths hold consequences. The golden path may lead to success, but it also may trap you in complacency. It may promise safety, but it will not challenge you. The dark path holds the power of transformation, but at a price. Lucas closed his eyes, trying to find clarity. He thought of everything he had faced, the trials, the fears, the doubts. He had always played it safe, always followed the path that seemed clear, the one that promised success without real risk. But was that truly living? Is it worth the risk? He whispered. Dr. Zhang's voice broke through his thoughts. Lucas, we don't have time. The decision has to be made now. For a long moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Lucas could feel the pull of both paths, each one whispering a different future. The golden path was the easy choice, the one that promised a life of success, the one everyone expected him to take. But the dark path, it was terrifying, unknown, and yet there was something about it that stirred something deep inside him. Suddenly, Lucas knew. He had been avoiding the truth his entire life. The truth that growth, real growth, came from challenges, from discomfort, from risk. And while the golden path might promise safety, the dark path offered the possibility of true transformation. I choose the dark path, Lucas said, his voice steady now, filled with resolve. The figure nodded slowly, its expression unreadable. Very well. Your choice is made. Prepare yourself for what comes next. Without another word, the figure raised its hand, and the ground beneath them began to rumble. The air crackled with energy as the darkness of the chosen path grew closer, enveloping them like a wave. The golden path faded into the background, a mere memory now. And then, just as they stepped onto the dark path, the figure's voice echoed one final time. Remember, Lucas, every choice has its consequences. What lies ahead will challenge you in ways you cannot yet imagine. The world around them twisted, the dark path now unfolding before them like an endless maze. The sense of uncertainty grew, but so did the sense of determination within Lucas. He had chosen this path, and now he would face whatever came next. There was no turning back. As they ventured deeper into the darkness, a low rumble filled the air. The ground shook violently, and before they could react, a massive figure emerged from the shadows. Its eyes glowing red, its silhouette monstrous. You chose poorly, the figure growled, its voice deep and guttural. And now, you will pay the price. The monstrous figure loomed before them, its massive form shrouded in the deepest shadows. Its eyes gleamed like burning coals, piercing through the darkness with an intensity that made the very air around them seem to crackle. Lucas's heart raced as the ground beneath his feet trembled, and the oppressive silence of the dark path became suffocating. For a moment, no one moved. The figure didn't advance, but the weight of its presence was undeniable. It felt as if the very essence of the path Lucas had chosen was alive, and it had a mind of its own, a mind that was far from welcoming. You think you've chosen a path of transformation, the creature's voice rumbled, its words like stones being dragged across the floor. But what you fail to understand, Lucas, is that the price of this transformation is steep. Lucas swallowed hard, his mind racing to process what was happening. He had known the dark path would come with challenges, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. Harris stepped forward, his eyes wide with disbelief. What are you? He demanded, his voice shaking slightly. He was trying to hold onto his composure, but the monster's presence was overwhelming. The figure tilted its head slightly, regarding Harris with a cold, contemptuous gaze. I am the keeper of this path, the embodiment of the consequences you have chosen to face. You sought transformation, but every transformation requires sacrifice. You've all made that choice. Dr. Zhang, usually calm and logical, now looked unsure. But we've faced trials. We've learned the truth. What more do you want from us? The creature's gaze shifted to Dr. Zhang, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something resembling amusement in its eyes. The truth, dear doctor, is that you cannot escape the darkness you've invited in. This is not merely a path of growth. It is a path that tests your very soul. Lucas stood still, trying to steady his breath. His mind was racing. He had chosen this path, but the gravity of that decision was only now hitting him. What had he truly invited upon himself and his team? "We didn't come here for riddles," Lucas said, his voice firmer now, though the fear still lingered. "We came here to face what's next. We're ready." The creature's laughter was low and menacing, reverberating through the very air around them. "You think you're ready? Ready for what? You've chosen a path where only those who truly understand sacrifice can thrive. And those who fail?" It leaned forward, its shadow stretching unnaturally long. "They are consumed, lost forever." A tense silence followed. No one spoke. The weight of the words seemed to hang in the air, heavy and suffocating. The figure raised one massive hand, and from the shadows, an eerie light began to glow. "You must now prove your worth. Only by confronting the darkest parts of yourselves can you hope to survive this path. If you succeed, you may find what you seek. But if you fail, the price will be irreversible." Without warning, the ground beneath them split open, revealing a vast chasm that stretched out in every direction. Dark tendrils rose from the abyss, curling around the edges of the new gap, pulling at their feet. "You will each face a personal trial," the figure's voice echoed, now amplified by the chasm's unnatural reverberations. "Only by confronting your greatest fear will you be allowed to proceed. Only then will you be worthy of transformation." The air became thick, oppressive, and Lucas could feel the tension rising in his chest. The trial had begun. Lucas stepped forward, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind flashed back to all the moments in his life where he had hesitated, where he had chosen the safe, comfortable path. Was that what the figure meant by transformation? Was this trial about letting go of the past, of embracing the unknown? He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. Suddenly, the darkness around him seemed to take shape, swirling, shifting into something familiar, yet terrifying. A figure emerged from the shadows, a version of himself, but twisted. This version of Lucas had eyes full of anger and regret, the kind of eyes that haunted him in his worst moments. The shadowed version of himself began to speak, its voice cold and accusing. "You could have been more, Lucas," it hissed. "You could have chosen greatness, but instead, you played it safe. You never took risks. You're weak." Lucas staggered back, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't just a trial. It was his own worst fear manifesting before him. The fear of never living up to his potential, of always staying in his comfort zone. But something deep inside him stirred. He had already faced so much, learned so much, and now, he couldn't let this version of himself win. He had to overcome it. "I've made mistakes," Lucas said, his voice shaking but growing stronger. "But I'm not that person anymore. I've chosen this path because I want to be more than my fears. I want to embrace the challenge, even if it means facing the darkness." The shadowy figure sneered at him, but Lucas didn't look away. He couldn't afford to. He had come too far to turn back now. With a final, defiant cry, Lucas stepped forward into the darkness of his own fear. And as he did, the figure before him disintegrated, fading into the abyss. The chasm slowly closed, and the ground solidified beneath Lucas's feet once again. He stood there, breathing heavily, his body trembling. But the fear was gone, and with it, a new sense of clarity emerged. "Well done," the figure's voice echoed, now quieter, less menacing. "You have passed your trial." But just as Lucas thought the trial was over, the ground shook violently once again. The light that had started to emerge from the dark path flickered and then sputtered out entirely. Something new was coming, a force far more dangerous than any of them had yet encountered. What do you think Lucas learned from his trial? How do you think the team will handle the next challenge? Do you think they're truly ready for what's to come? Let us know in the comments. The ground trembled beneath their feet as the world around them shifted once more. The eerie silence that had followed Lucas's trial was shattered by a low, ominous hum, reverberating through the air. It was as if the entire space was waking up, as if the very essence of the darkness had come to life. Lucas, still catching his breath from the harrowing trial, felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wasn't sure what was worse, The creature's earlier threats or the unsettling sensation that something far worse was lurking just beyond the veil. Harris, who had been standing motionless, suddenly tensed. "What's happening?" he asked, his voice strained with anxiety. Before anyone could answer, the ground beneath their feet cracked open once again, this time more violently. The chasm they had seen moments earlier reappeared, but this time, it was far larger. Dark tendrils began to rise from the depths, twisting and writhing as if seeking something or someone. The figure, now looming even larger, had not moved but seemed to grow more menacing with every passing second. "You have done well to face your fear, Lucas," the creature's voice echoed, softer now but filled with a disturbing sense of satisfaction. "But you are not yet ready." The ground seemed to bend and distort around them as the creature's presence enveloped them in a suffocating wave. The air felt heavier, as though something unseen was pressing down on them with relentless force. "You still have much to learn," the creature continued, its words a sharp contrast to the gentler tone it had used moments before. "Your journey has only just begun. The true test lies ahead, and you will face it together. But not all of you will survive." Suddenly, the darkness around them seemed to pulse with an almost sentient energy, as if it had a mind of its own. The air grew thick, the temperature plummeting. A voice, a whisper, began to slither through Lucas's mind, quiet but insistent. "Do you think you've truly faced your fears, Lucas?" it asked, its tone dripping with mockery. "You think you've conquered yourself? What if the greatest challenge isn't something external, but the darkness inside your own mind? The parts of you that you've hidden, the parts you dare not face. Will you truly be able to confront them?" Lucas shook his head, trying to rid himself of the voice, but it clung to him like a shadow. "No," he whispered, trying to clear his thoughts. "I've already faced it. I chose to step forward. I'm ready for whatever comes." The darkness around them seemed to split into two paths, each equally terrifying. One path was bathed in a dim, ghostly light, and the other remained shrouded in an almost tangible darkness. "This is where the real trial begins," the creature intoned, its voice laced with finality. "You must choose which path to take." Lucas felt his heart race. They had already faced their fears, hadn't they? What more could they possibly encounter that would be worse than this? The trials had already stripped them bare, pushing them to their limits. Yet here they were, standing at the edge of an even deeper abyss. "How do we choose?" Harris asked, his voice low with uncertainty. "What happens if we pick the wrong one?" The creature's gaze flickered toward Harris, a smile curling at the edges of its form. "The wrong path? There is no wrong path. There is only your path. Each choice will lead you to a different end. The question is, can you live with the consequences?" Lucas glanced at his team. Each of them wore the same expression. Uncertainty mixed with fear, but also determination. They had come this far. They couldn't turn back now. "This is it," Lucas said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling inside him. "We choose. No more hesitation. We move forward." The darkness seemed to breathe as Lucas stepped forward, his mind buzzing with 1,000 questions. Which path would lead them to their goal? What awaited them at the end? The creature's ominous words echoed in his mind. "Can you live with the consequences?" He stepped into the light path, feeling the weight of his decision settle over him like a heavy cloak. His team followed, and together they moved forward, each step drawing them deeper into the unknown. As they moved deeper into the light, Lucas began to feel a strange sense of clarity, as though a weight was lifting from his shoulders. The path wasn't easy, but it was clear. They could see where they were going, and for a brief moment, the feeling of hope surged within him. Maybe they had chosen wisely. But then, the light flickered, and for a moment, everything went dark. When the light returned, it revealed something they weren't prepared for. The path they had chosen led them into a vast chamber, the walls lined with mirrors. Each mirror reflected something different. Some showed their faces, others their deepest fears, and still others reflected twisted, distorted versions of themselves. Lucas froze as he stared into one of the mirrors. The reflection that looked back at him was not the person he recognized. It was a man consumed by regret, standing alone, beaten down by every mistake he had ever made. This wasn't just a test of their strength or courage. This was a test of their very identity. As the group continued to walk through the chamber, their reflections began to shift. The mirrors showed images that were no longer familiar, each more distorted than the last. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest. The deeper they went, the more the reflections changed, as if the mirrors were feeding on their insecurities. And then, in one of the mirrors, Lucas saw something that made his blood run cold. His reflection smiled at him, but it wasn't his smile. Lucas stood motionless, his eyes locked on the mirror before him. The reflection was no longer his own, or at least, not the version he recognized. The figure in the glass grinned at him, a cold, mocking smile, not his own expression of determination. The eyes were different, vacant yet filled with a terrifying certainty. A chill ran down his spine. His breath caught in his throat. "This isn't me. This can't be me." "Lucas?" Harris's voice broke through the thick, oppressive silence that hung in the air. "What's wrong?" The others had noticed the shift in Lucas's behavior. He was staring into the mirror, frozen, his face pale. Lucas didn't respond immediately. His heart was racing, his mind spinning. What if this is the truth? The thought echoed like a hammer inside his skull. What if this is who I really am, and I've been lying to myself all along? "Lucas, what's happening?" Sarah's voice trembled as she joined him in front of the mirror. She stepped back quickly, her own reflection warping into something unrecognizable. In the glass, she saw a version of herself, older, worn, and utterly alone. Her own reflection reached out to her, almost as if to beg her for help. "No," she whispered, pulling away. "This isn't me." Behind her, Harris stepped forward, his eyes glued to his own mirror. His reflection was of a man broken by betrayal, a shattered version of the man who had been so sure of himself before. "I've never seen this before," Harris murmured, his voice a mix of awe and horror. "None of us have," Lucas said hoarsely. "This is the trial. We aren't facing monsters, creatures, or even physical threats. We're facing ourselves." As each member of the group stared at their reflection, the chamber seemed to grow colder, more oppressive. Every mirror showed a version of them that they didn't recognize, tangled with regret, despair, and fear. It was as though the mirrors were pulling their deepest vulnerabilities to the surface, exposing them for all to see. It wasn't just their fears that were being revealed. It was their darkest desires, their hidden regrets, and the parts of themselves they had buried deep down. The creatures they had faced before were nothing compared to the monsters within their own hearts. "We have to face these," Lucas said, his voice trembling as he took a step back. "If we don't, we won't make it out of here." Sarah shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I can't face this." "It's not about facing it alone," Lucas said. "We do this together. We have to help each other through this." The group gathered together in front of the mirrors, each of them standing side by side, united in their fear. The reflections were not just about who they were, but who they feared they might become if they gave in to their darker sides. "Remember why we're here," Lucas said, his voice strong despite the turmoil inside. "We're doing this for each other. We're doing this to survive." The words, simple as they were, seemed to have a profound effect on the group. Slowly, the mirrors began to change. The figures within started to shift, though still hauntingly distorted. They no longer had the same overpowering influence over their minds. They could see themselves more clearly, not as monsters, but as people capable of change. Harris's reflection began to soften. The cold, betrayal-filled version of him started to fade, replaced by a version who stood tall, not bowed by the past. Sarah's mirror softened too, the lonely, regretful figure fading into someone who embraced both the past and future, ready to move forward. Lucas's reflection was the last to change. The dark, mocking smile still lingered, but his reflection began to meet his gaze, no longer sneering, but looking back at him with a shared understanding. He wasn't perfect. He had his flaws, his mistakes, and his fears, but those were the things that made him who he was. "I'm not afraid anymore," Lucas said quietly. "I can be better." Just as the final reflections began to fade, The ground beneath them trembled again, and the mirrors began to crack, one by one. Each crack was like a tolling bell, signaling the end of the trial. The dark chamber pulsed as if releasing the grip it had on them. But even as the mirrors shattered, they could feel a new weight pressing in on them, a question that still hung in the air. Would they continue to fight? "We're not done yet," Sarah said, her voice firm. She looked at each of them in turn. "We've made it this far, and we will make it through the next trial. Together." The mirrors were now nothing more than shards of glass scattered across the floor. The oppressive weight of the chamber had lifted, but the group knew they had only taken the first steps in a much longer journey. The air was still thick with the remnants of the trial, but there was a newfound strength in each of them. "We move forward," Lucas said, his voice steady. "We face what comes next, no matter what it is." As they made their way forward, the path ahead seemed to open up. The darkness still clung to the edges, but the light ahead was brighter than before. They didn't know what awaited them, but for the first time in a long time, they felt ready for it. As they stepped into the next chamber, the ground began to tremble again, but this time the rumbling felt different. It was deeper, more ominous, like the heartbeat of the world itself. The group paused, looking around, but the chamber seemed empty. No creatures, no mirrors, just the dark abyss surrounding them. Then, from the shadows, a voice emerged, a voice they had not heard before, but one they would never forget. "Welcome," the voice said, and there was an edge of something ancient, something evil, in its tone. "You think you've conquered the trial, but now, the true test begins." The voice echoed in the chamber, deep and resonant, carrying a weight that seemed to press on their chests. Lucas, Sarah, and Harris exchanged uneasy glances. The tension in the air thickened, and their previous triumph over the mirrors felt fleeting, like a temporary illusion. "What do we do now?" Sarah whispered, barely able to keep her voice steady. Lucas didn't answer immediately. The voice had been powerful, unsettling. It wasn't just speaking to them. It felt like it was speaking through them, tapping into something primal and hidden deep within. The ground trembled again, but this time it felt purposeful, like the earth itself was alive, reacting to their presence. Slowly, the chamber around them began to shift. Walls that had been invisible before now seemed to twist, reshaping into a labyrinth of dark corridors. "Move," Lucas said, his voice sharp. "We don't have time to question what's happening. We keep moving." The group began to walk forward, cautiously, as the dark labyrinth seemed to stretch before them. The walls seemed to shift and change, closing in on them, then opening up again, as if the very architecture of the chamber was alive, testing them. "Is this real?" Harris murmured, touching the wall. His hand sank into the stone-like surface, a brief sensation of cold water before it pulled back. "It feels like it," Lucas replied, keeping his eyes on the twisting paths ahead. "But that's the point. We don't know what's real here. We need to trust our instincts." The further they walked, the more disorienting the maze became. Every turn seemed to lead to another dead end, only to open up into new corridors that felt endless. It was as though the chamber was playing with their minds, tricking them into believing they were lost when in reality, they were moving through a carefully designed path meant to break their resolve. Suddenly, the walls stopped shifting. The maze opened up into a large, cavernous room, and in the center, a massive stone pedestal stood, upon which sat three objects. A soft light illuminated them, casting long shadows across the room. Each object seemed familiar, but at the same time, they felt wrong, alien. Lucas approached cautiously. The objects were simple: a cracked, worn book, an old photograph, and a small mirror. They felt like representations of their past, their memories. "This is the first test," Lucas said, his voice quiet but determined. "We have to face our weaknesses. These objects are tied to what we fear most. I can already feel it." Lucas stepped forward, his eyes on the worn book. He reached out and touched it. The moment his fingers made contact, the room shifted again. His surroundings faded into darkness, and then, like a dream unfolding, he was back in his childhood home. It was a memory he had long buried, one of failure and heartbreak. The book was something he had once loved, a collection of stories that had inspired him to become who he was. But it was also the source of his greatest regret. He had once lost the book in a moment of carelessness, and the person who had given it to him, his grandmother, had died soon after. Lucas felt a tightness in his chest. The guilt, he thought, his voice shaking. The fear of losing people I care about. It all stems from this moment. But as the memory played out, something shifted within him. This isn't me anymore, he realized. I've grown. I've moved beyond this fear. I can't keep running from it. With that thought, the memory faded, and the book disappeared, replaced by the next object. Sarah stepped forward, hesitating only for a moment before picking up the old photograph. Instantly, the scene around her shifted, and she was back in the house she had grown up in. Except it wasn't the house she remembered. It was colder, darker, filled with echoes of things unsaid. The photograph was a picture of her family, her parents standing proudly beside her as a young child. But Sarah's gaze lingered on the empty space beside them, where her brother should have been. The memory rushed back, the night he disappeared without a trace, the night she had been unable to save him. I couldn't save him, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. I couldn't even protect my own family. The weight of the loss pressed heavily on her chest, and she fell to her knees. But then, something within her stirred. It wasn't my fault, she thought, feeling the truth rise within her. I didn't fail him. I did everything I could. I have to forgive myself. The room around her shifted again, the photograph dissolving as the painful memory began to fade. She stood up, stronger than before. Harris stepped forward, his gaze locking on the small mirror. As he touched it, the reflection before him wasn't his own. Instead, it was a man he once knew, a man who had betrayed him, a man who had shattered the trust Harris had placed in him. The image in the mirror seemed to laugh at him, mocking him for his weakness. Why did you let him control you? The reflection sneered. You're just as weak as he said you were. Harris felt a wave of rage and helplessness surge through him. Why didn't I fight back? The question echoed in his mind. But then something in him shifted. He wasn't the same person who had been so easily manipulated. He was stronger now, no longer bound by the lies of others. Enough, he muttered. I'm not that person anymore. The mirror shattered, and with it, the reflection faded, leaving Harris standing tall, the weight of the past lifting from his shoulders. As the last of the objects disappeared, the room began to shift again. The walls, once dark and oppressive, now lightened, revealing a new path forward. The three stood together, stronger than before, but also aware of the trials yet to come. They had faced their pasts, their weaknesses, and they had come out the other side with a deeper understanding of themselves. But they knew the true test was still ahead. Are we ready? Lucas asked, his voice steady but laced with the gravity of what lay ahead. The others nodded, their faces determined. They had faced their darkest fears, but now they were united. More than just survivors of the maze, but warriors ready to face whatever awaited them. As they stepped forward, the ground trembled again, this time violently, as if something enormous was moving beneath them. A shadow stretched across the ceiling, and the room began to rumble. The sound of heavy breathing filled the air. A massive, serpentine shape emerged from the shadows, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. The creature was unlike anything they had ever seen, a creature born of their darkest fears. The real test had only just begun. The creature's massive body coiled through the room, casting an ominous shadow over the group. Its eyes glowed with a fiery intensity, scanning the three of them with a predatory gleam. It was unlike any beast they had ever encountered, its form shifting, its movements fluid and serpentine, as though the very shadows were part of its body. Lucas's heart raced as the ground beneath their feet began to vibrate. "What is that thing?" he asked, barely able to form the words as the enormity of the creature before them sank in. "I don't know," Sarah replied, her voice tight with fear, but also strangely calm. "But I think it's the next trial." The serpent's body swirled and rippled, its long tail slithering across the floor, moving with a grace that defied its terrifying appearance. Its glowing eyes fixed on them, and then it spoke. Its voice wasn't just in their ears, it was inside their minds, a deep, resonant hum that vibrated through their very bones. "You have faced your pasts," the serpent's voice echoed. "But now, you must face what lies ahead. You must confront your deepest fears, not of the past, but of the unknown." The room shifted again, the walls folding inward, the space shrinking with every passing second. The creature began to move closer, its eyes never leaving their faces. "What do you want from us?" Harris asked, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at the edges of his mind. The serpent's head tilted, and it responded with a sound like thunder rolling in the distance. "I want you to face the future. I want you to confront the uncertainty of what comes next, and I want you to do it together. If you succeed, you will earn your freedom. If you fail, you will be trapped here forever." The air grew thick with tension, the serpent's words sinking in. The creature wasn't merely a physical threat. It represented the uncertainty that lay ahead for each of them. The fear of what was to come, the fear of failure, the fear of the unknown. Sarah stepped forward, her mind racing. How do we defeat something that represents our future? She thought. But she quickly realized that wasn't the right question. The true challenge wasn't in defeating the serpent. It was in overcoming the fear of what it symbolized. "Do you think we're ready for this?" Sarah asked, looking to Lucas and Harris. "Can we face what we don't know?" Lucas's gaze met hers, determination in his eyes. "We don't have a choice. We've come this far. We can't stop now." Harris nodded, though his jaw was clenched. "We've faced our past. We can face whatever the future holds." The serpent's eyes gleamed, as if sensing their resolve. "Very well," it hissed. "The test begins now." With a flick of its tail, the room dissolved into a swirling vortex of colors and light. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to dissolve into mist, and the three of them were suddenly standing on a precipice, overlooking an endless abyss. The sky above them was dark, filled with swirling clouds and flashes of lightning. "Where are we?" Harris asked, fear creeping into his voice. "This isn't real," Lucas said, shaking his head. "This is another test, a trial of the mind. We're facing the unknown, and we need to trust each other to get through it." As if on cue, the ground beneath them began to shift again. A massive door appeared before them, towering and ancient, its surface etched with strange symbols. The door opened slowly, revealing a passageway filled with swirling fog. It was impossible to see what lay beyond. "Only one of us can pass through at a time," the serpent's voice boomed. "The others must remain behind. Choose wisely." The decision was agonizing. Each of them could feel the weight of the future pressing down on them, and the fear of what might happen next gnawed at them. The serpent had challenged them to face their futures, but this was different. This wasn't just about what lay ahead. It was about trust, sacrifice, and facing the unknown together. Sarah was the first to step forward. She didn't hesitate, her heart pounding as she made her way toward the door. She had always been the one to take charge, but this was different. She wasn't leading them into battle. She was walking into the future, alone, with no idea what awaited her. As she crossed the threshold, the fog engulfed her, and the world around her dissolved into a kaleidoscope of images and emotions. The future, her future, seemed to stretch out before her like an endless road, twisting and turning with no clear direction. She saw herself older, wiser, more confident, but also uncertain. There were moments of joy, of success, but also moments of failure, of doubt, of pain. She saw herself alone at times, but at others, surrounded by friends, family, and a love she hadn't yet found. The images blurred, shifting with every step, and the fog began to close in around her. Her heart raced as the uncertainty of it all threatened to overwhelm her. This is what the serpent meant, she realized. The future isn't just one thing. It's 1,000 possibilities, 1,000 choices, 1,000 outcomes. But she knew she couldn't turn back. There was no way to predict what the future would hold, but there was one thing she could control: her willingness to face it head-on. As Sarah moved deeper into the fog, she felt a sudden shift, a pull toward something. She couldn't see it, but she could feel it. It was a choice, a moment that would define her. The fog swirled, and the world around her began to collapse. But then, the fog parted, and Sarah found herself standing at the edge of a cliff. In the distance, the storm raged, but in front of her, there was a calm, serene path, illuminated by a soft, golden light. She took a deep breath and stepped forward, realizing that no matter how dark the future might seem, there was always a way through. As Sarah stepped forward, she glanced back, seeing the faintest shimmer of the path she had just left behind. But then, the ground shook violently. The serpent's voice echoed again, its tone darker than before. "Do not forget," it hissed. "The future is not so easily conquered." Suddenly, the fog began to close in around her, and the path started to fade. The weight of the future pressed down on her once more, but this time, she was ready. The ground beneath Sarah seemed to tremble as the golden light dimmed, swallowed by the encroaching fog. The path ahead flickered, dissolving into mist. Sarah froze for a moment, heart racing. The calm she had briefly experienced was now replaced with the overwhelming pressure of uncertainty. Behind her, the serpent's voice echoed once again, sharper this time. "You may think you have seen your future, but remember, the unknown always holds something more." The words were like a warning, or perhaps a challenge. Sarah couldn't decide which. Her mind raced. The golden path had felt right, hopeful, serene. Yet now it was fading, and she was left with an overwhelming sense of loss. Her gaze flicked back to the fog, where shadows danced in the mist. What was the serpent really showing me? She took a deep breath, summoning the courage she'd learned to embrace in the past. The unknown was always frightening, but it was also what they'd been preparing for all along. She didn't come this far just to turn away. "Sarah!" A voice broke through her thoughts, and she spun to see Lucas and Harris standing at the threshold of the fog. They looked as if they hadn't moved, as if they hadn't been able to follow her into this strange new place. "Sarah, come back?" Harris shouted, his voice strained with concern. "This isn't you. You can't go on alone." The weight of their words made her hesitate. They were her family in this ordeal. Together, they had endured the trials, had faced their pasts, and had conquered their deepest fears. Could she really do this alone? But even as their voices tugged at her, she felt an insistent pull toward the path, toward the golden light that had disappeared but wasn't gone entirely. The choice was hers: stay and rely on her friends, or trust the path that had been revealed to her. With a determined shake of her head, Sarah stepped further into the fog. "I can't come back," she whispered to herself, but also to them. Not this time. As Sarah walked deeper, the path seemed to form around her, solidifying in fragments as she moved. In front of her, the fog began to clear, revealing not one but two distinct paths. One was bathed in shadow, its edges jagged and twisted, like a dark alley that no one would dare venture down. The other path was illuminated by soft, pale light, leading into the unknown but offering a sense of comfort. A voice, not the serpent's, but a whisper that seemed to emanate from the shadows, beckoned her. "You've been given a choice," it said. "The light is an illusion, a false hope. Only the darkness will show you the truth." Sarah hesitated. The serpent had spoken of the future as an unknown, but now this voice suggested the light was a trap. Was it testing her resolve? Or was it showing her something about herself that she had yet to understand? She looked down at the two paths. The light path seemed easy, comforting, but the shadowed one, there was something about it, something that felt like a deeper truth. Could it be a reflection of the fears she hadn't fully confronted? Was the light only the illusion of an easy way out? With a deep breath, Sarah chose the shadowed path. As soon as she took a step forward, the light behind her vanished entirely, and the world around her seemed to compress into a narrow tunnel. The air grew colder, the walls stretching upward like towering figures, casting ominous shadows that twisted and reached for her. Her pulse quickened, and the further she ventured, the darker it became. She could hear nothing but the soft echoes of her footsteps, the silence pressing in on her from all sides. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath, watching her every move. As Sarah walked, she started to see glimpses, flashes of her life, moments from her past that she thought she had buried. Her childhood, the mistakes she'd made, her fear of failure, and the times when she doubted herself. Each image seemed to appear and vanish, leaving her with a sense of lingering regret. But then, just as the weight of the darkness seemed unbearable, Sarah noticed a shift in the shadows. They no longer seemed oppressive but familiar, as though they were guiding her rather than trapping her. She stopped, realizing that the path wasn't just a trial. It was a reflection of her own journey. The shadows represented the parts of herself she had neglected, the fears, the insecurities, and the unresolved questions. She wasn't running away from them anymore. She was walking through them, allowing them to shape her, rather than break her. The path continued, winding and twisting, until, finally, the tunnel opened into a vast, open space. In the center, a single stone pedestal stood, bathed in soft, golden light. On it was a small, delicate key. Sarah approached the pedestal, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and fear. What was this key? Was it the answer to the serpent's challenge? Or was it something more? Something that would unlock a future she wasn't yet prepared for? She reached out cautiously, her fingers brushing the cool surface of the key. The moment her skin made contact with it, the world around her exploded into light. Sarah gasped, her vision flooded with blinding white light. She tried to pull her hand back, but it was as though the key had fused with her, its power coursing through her veins, changing something deep inside her. The light began to fade, but Sarah realized she was no longer in the tunnel. She stood in a vast, open field under a sky that pulsed with energy. The key was now glowing in her hand, and in the distance, she saw a figure approaching. The figure was cloaked in shadow, and it wasn't until they were mere feet away that Sarah realized who it was. It was Lucas, but his eyes were hollow, filled with an emptiness she had never seen before. He spoke, his voice low and filled with pain. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah. The future, it's not what you think." The air around Sarah felt charged with an electric tension. The key in her hand pulsed, almost as if it were alive, responding to the presence of Lucas, whose hollow eyes locked onto hers. The overwhelming weight of the moment hung in the air like a storm on the horizon, and Sarah's pulse quickened, her breath shallow. "Lucas," she whispered, taking a step back. "What is this place? What happened to you?" The man before her, once her closest friend, looked so different now. His face drawn and weary, his presence clouded by an aura of emptiness. The Lucas she had known had been determined, full of life, and fiercely loyal. But this version of him, this stranger, was something else entirely. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah," Lucas repeated, his voice a ghost of what it had once been. "This place, it's not what you think. The future isn't what you think it is." Sarah's mind raced. What was he talking about? Was this some twisted trick? Or was it a warning? She looked down at the key, its golden glow seeming to hum with an energy that sent a chill through her spine. "Where are we?" Sarah asked, more firmly this time. "And why do you look like this?" Lucas looked around the field, as if the question had struck a deeper chord in him than he was willing to admit. His gaze flicked back to her, eyes filled with a sorrow that made her heart tighten. "This is the heart of everything, Sarah. It's where all the roads meet, the past, the present, the future. It's where we come when we're ready to face the truth." His words were quiet but heavy with meaning, like the weight of the world was pressing on his shoulders. "And you?" Sarah pressed. "What happened to you? Why do you look so empty?" Lucas' expression faltered for a brief moment, and in that split second, Sarah saw the flicker of the Lucas she once knew. The one who had always been there for her, who had always believed in the impossible. "It's what this place does, Sarah," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "It takes what we are and shows us what we could have been, what we might become, and then it shows us what we've lost. I came here to find answers, to fix everything. But I lost myself in the process." Sarah's heart sank as she realized the depth of his pain. The truth about the future, the answers they sought, weren't just a matter of facts or events. They were a matter of choices. And every choice, every path they had taken, had consequences. "Then we're not here for nothing," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of thoughts and emotions raging inside her. "This key, it's not just a symbol. It's a way forward. isn't it? Lucas didn't answer immediately. Instead, he seemed to stare at the key, as though it held the answers to questions he had long stopped asking. After a long pause, he spoke again, his voice tinged with something like regret. Yes, the key is a choice. But be careful, Sarah. What you choose now, it will decide everything. As the words left Lucas's mouth, the ground beneath Sarah shifted, pulling her deeper into the landscape, as if the field itself was alive, reacting to her every decision. The sky overhead began to ripple, flickering between shades of dark and light, a metaphor for the confusion swirling inside her. What do you mean by that? Sarah asked, her mind spinning as she took another step back. What will it decide? What's at stake? Lucas' eyes softened, but the emptiness never left. He took a deep breath, his shoulders slumping as though the weight of all his unspoken thoughts had finally caught up with him. It's not just about the future, Sarah. It's about who you become along the way. You can't change everything. Some things are set in stone. His voice trailed off as if he were speaking to himself rather than her. But this is where everything can either be healed or lost. The key, it's not just to a door. It's to your soul. The words were like a punch to the gut. The truth was harsh, undeniable. Sarah had always thought of the future as something malleable, something they could fight for, twist into their vision. But now, standing before Lucas in this strange world, she realized that it wasn't that simple. Her mind raced as she tried to understand the full weight of what Lucas was telling her. Could the future really be so fixed? Was there no hope for change? No way to alter the mistakes they'd all made? Is this what you wanted, Lucas? Sarah asked softly. Is this how you imagined it would be? To face the truth alone, without anyone there to help you? Lucas swallowed hard, the pain in his eyes more evident than ever. No, he whispered. I thought I could fix it, but I was wrong. Sarah's heart beat loudly in her chest, echoing in the vast silence around them. The weight of Lucas's words hung heavy in the air, but as she glanced down at the key, something within her stirred. The answers she sought were not just about the future, but about herself. She realized then that the key wasn't a simple object. It was a manifestation of her own inner conflict, a representation of the choices she had to make. The path ahead wasn't just about changing the world, or finding the answers to all their questions. It was about understanding herself, confronting her own fears and uncertainties. The moment she understood this, the field around her seemed to pulse with life, the air growing warmer, the sky shifting to a more hopeful hue. Lucas, Sarah said, her voice stronger now, filled with a clarity that had eluded her moments ago. You're right. The future isn't something we can control completely, but it's also not something that controls us. We have the power to choose what we make of it, what we make of ourselves. And that's enough. Lucas looked at her, and for the first time in what felt like ages, he seemed to see her, truly see her, not as someone to save, but as someone who understood the weight of their shared journey. I hope you're right, Sarah, he murmured. Before she could say anything more, the world around them began to tremble, the field rippling as if it were about to collapse into itself. The key in Sarah's hand grew hot, and a bright light blazed from within the stone pedestal. Something was coming, something powerful. Sarah? Don't make the wrong choice, Lucas whispered urgently, but his voice was drowned out by the blinding light. The blinding light enveloped Sarah, pulling her in, sweeping her off her feet. Her surroundings seemed to fade into a blur, and for a brief, heart-stopping moment, she felt herself falling into an abyss. The key in her hand pulsed faster, as if it had a life of its own, a heartbeat syncing with hers, sending waves of warmth through her body. She could hear Lucas's voice, distant and muffled, but it didn't matter. There was only the light, the key, and the feeling of being caught between two worlds, one she had known, and the other, one she could not yet understand. The ground beneath her disappeared, and she was suspended in an endless void, weightless, yet not free. The bright light surrounded her, and a sense of foreboding gripped her chest. She reached out instinctively, clutching the key tighter. But then, as if the world itself was holding its breath, everything shifted. The light dimmed, and Sarah found herself standing in a vast, open space. It was a place that seemed both familiar and completely foreign at the same time. An ethereal, shifting landscape, suspended between time and reality. The air was thick with a sense of purpose, like every grain of dust in the air had a reason for being there. And in the center of this strange new world, Sarah could see something, or someone. A figure stood before her, cloaked in shadows, their face obscured. They held a glowing orb that cast ripples of light across the ground. The figure's presence was commanding, yet distant, as if they existed outside the bounds of time itself. Sarah's heart raced. Was this another test? Another challenge? Or was this the moment she had been waiting for? "Welcome, Sarah," the figure said, their voice soft but powerful, reverberating in the stillness. "I have been waiting for you." "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to remain calm. "And where am I?" "You are standing at the crossroads," the figure replied. "A place between the past, the present, and the future. Here, all things are possible, and all choices are final." Sarah's mind spun. The crossroads? A place where all paths converged? What did this mean for her, for Lucas, for the future they were desperately trying to understand? The figure tilted their head, as if sensing her confusion. "You hold the key, Sarah. The key to everything that could be, and everything that will be. It is yours to choose what comes next." Sarah's hand tightened around the key. The weight of their words pressed down on her, as if the very fabric of reality was waiting for her decision. This was it, the moment she had feared and desired in equal measure. "What do you mean, everything?" Sarah asked, stepping forward, her voice shaking now with a mix of awe and uncertainty. "How can one choice change everything? The future, the world, the people I care about?" The figure's face remained hidden, but a soft, almost imperceptible smile seemed to tug at the edges of their voice. "One choice, one path. The ripple effects will alter not just the future, but the essence of who you are, who everyone is. A single action, Sarah, and the entire balance shifts." Sarah looked down at the key in her hand. It had grown warmer, almost unbearably so, and its glow seemed to pulse with her own heartbeat. She felt as though she were holding the weight of the entire world in her palm. "You're asking me to decide the fate of everything?" Sarah's voice was steady now, though her insides churned. That's too much. I don't know if I can do that." "You've already made the decision by coming here," the figure replied cryptically. "The future is written not in stone, but in the choices we make. And you, Sarah, are at the edge of all possibilities." The words struck her like lightning. Her mind reeled as she tried to process what was happening. This was it, the culmination of everything she and Lucas had worked for, the very essence of their journey. "Why me?" she asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. "Why am I the one who has to decide?" The figure's voice softened, almost kind. "Because you have the courage to choose, Sarah. Others may hesitate, fear the unknown. But you're ready. You always have been." A cold shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Could she really do this? Could she truly be the one to decide? To change the future? The pressure was unbearable, and yet there was something inside her, something deep and ancient, that felt ready for this challenge. Before she could speak, the figure raised a hand, and the orb in their grasp flickered like a star on the verge of burning out. A wave of energy rushed toward Sarah, pulling her in, surrounding her with images, visions of a world that could be, and one that could never come to pass. Faces of people she loved, people she had yet to meet, and people she had long since lost. Each one bathed in a different light, a different path, a different future. "These are the choices you face," the figure intoned. "Every path leads somewhere. The question is, which one will you choose?" The vision swirled, becoming overwhelming, dizzying, until Sarah felt as though she might drown in it. But then, she realized something. This wasn't about seeing all the answers. It was about trusting herself, her instincts. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, allowing the vision to wash over her without fear. The choices were hers to make, but they were also the product of who she had become, the strength, the wisdom, and the heart that had brought her this far. When she opened her eyes again, she felt clearer, more grounded. She was ready. The key in her hand thrummed with power, and she knew what she had to do. Sarah, the figure's voice broke through her thoughts. Are you ready to make the choice? Her grip tightened around the key, and she nodded. Yes, she whispered, her voice firm with newfound determination. I'm ready. As Sarah's words echoed through the void, the light around her flickered once more, and the figure began to dissipate, their form melting into the air. The ground beneath Sarah's feet began to shake violently, and the space around her started to twist and bend. The crossroads, once so clear, now seemed to blur into infinite possibilities. One final choice remained. But before Sarah could act, a deafening roar filled the air, and the ground split open beneath her. The roar reverberated through the air, a deep, guttural sound that seemed to come from the very heart of the earth. The ground beneath Sarah's feet cracked, sending tremors through her body. The visions she had just seen, the crossroads, the paths stretching infinitely before her, began to warp and twist. The entire space seemed to fold in on itself, as if the very fabric of reality was unraveling. Her heart pounded in her chest as the light around her dimmed. In the distance, the figure, the shadowy, cloaked presence, was disappearing, swallowed by the growing chaos. The orb it had been holding flickered out of existence, its glow fading into nothingness. Sarah's grip on the key tightened, the pulsing warmth now a searing heat that threatened to burn her hand. Her mind raced as the roaring grew louder, echoing around her. What was happening? Had she made the wrong choice? Or had the choice been made for her? She could feel it, the weight of her decision, the gravity of the moment. The key in her hand wasn't just an object. It was the very essence of everything that had led her to this point. This was the moment that would shape the future. Her future, Lucas's future, and the fate of everything she had fought for. But now, as the world around her collapsed, Sarah realized something. This wasn't just about making the right choice. It was about finding the strength to face the consequences of whatever choice she made. Sarah. The voice was a whisper at first, but it grew louder, more urgent. You must act now. The crossroads are collapsing. Time is running out. It was Lucas's voice. Her heart surged at the sound of it, and she instinctively called out, Lucas? Where are you? What's happening? The darkness before her began to shift, and out of the shadows, she saw him. His figure barely visible at first, but then more distinct as the world around them shifted. He was standing in front of her, his face etched with worry, his eyes wide with fear. Sarah, we don't have much time. Lucas's voice was urgent, shaking. You have the key, but you have to decide now. If we don't. Before he could finish, the ground beneath them split open once more, sending a shockwave through the air. A crackling energy shot up from the earth, swirling around them like a storm. The air was thick with tension, and Sarah could feel it. Something was changing. Something big was about to happen. The crossroads were no longer a place of choice. They were a place of desperation, of finality. And in that moment, Sarah knew that whatever she did next, it would be the end of one world and the beginning of another. Sarah. Lucas's voice broke through the chaos. He was close now, his hand reaching out toward hers. You have to make the choice. Only you can stop this. But you can't do it alone. We have to face it together. Her eyes locked with his, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. There was no more time for second guesses or doubt. This was the moment she had been building toward, and everything depended on it. The key in her hand began to pulse wildly, the heat now unbearable. It felt like the very core of the earth was shifting with it, aligning with her thoughts, with her heart. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She had come this far, through every trial, every moment of doubt, every challenge. She had earned the right to decide, and she knew what she had to do. She turned to Lucas, her voice steady despite the turmoil around them. Whatever happens next, we face it together. I'm not making this choice alone. Lucas's eyes softened, a flicker of relief passing over his face. Together, he agreed. In that instant, the key in Sarah's hand flared brighter than ever before, casting a brilliant light across the crumbling landscape. The ground beneath their feet began to solidify, the chaos slowly retreating. The storm of energy around them began to settle, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Sarah felt a sense of clarity. The figure, the shadowed presence, had returned, standing in front of them once more. It looked at Sarah with a sense of knowing, as if everything had already been decided. "Do you understand now?" the figure asked, its voice echoing in the silence that followed. "The choice is yours, but it is not just about what you want. It is about what the world needs. What you need." Sarah nodded, the key still pulsing in her hand. "I understand." And in that understanding, everything became clear. The future was not just a matter of fate or destiny, it was about balance. The key, the crossroads, the choices, everything led to this moment, this fragile point where one world could end and another could begin. It was up to her to choose which world would rise from the ashes. Before Sarah could make her final decision, the figure raised its hand, and the landscape around them began to shift once more. A bright flash of light illuminated everything, blinding her for a moment. When she opened her eyes again, everything had changed. The crossroads were gone, and in their place, there was only one path. But was it the right one? The light that had burst forth around Sarah faded slowly, leaving her blinking in its wake, trying to adjust to the new reality. The crossroads were gone, replaced by a single path that stretched infinitely ahead of them. The familiar noise of the world, the hum of electricity, the rustle of leaves, was replaced by a deep, unsettling silence. Lucas stood beside her, his hand gripping hers, the warmth of his touch grounding her in the surreal moment. For a fleeting second, Sarah thought she might still be dreaming. But no, everything felt too real. The weight of the key in her hand was undeniable, as was the pull of the path ahead. It was all here now, everything she had fought for, everything she had hoped for. This was the moment of truth. The figure that had appeared before them, silent and distant as it had always been, finally spoke. Its voice was clear, yet haunting, as though it carried the weight of ages. "This is the path. There is no turning back, no more choices. You have reached the final step." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The path ahead seemed endless, an eternity of possibility. Yet, it also seemed to close in on her, like a narrow tunnel that had no way out. Was she ready for what lay ahead? Could she handle the consequences of her decision? Lucas's hand squeezed hers tighter, as if sensing her uncertainty. "We don't have to do this alone," he whispered. "Whatever comes next, we face it together, no matter how difficult it may seem." Sarah turned to him, a soft smile pulling at her lips. He had been with her every step of the way, offering support when she felt lost, grounding her when she was at her lowest. In that moment, she knew what she had to do. The path in front of them began to glow, as though inviting them to step forward. It felt as if it had been waiting for them to make this very choice, this very decision. And she understood. This wasn't just a test of what she could do alone, but a test of their bond, their commitment to one another. Without saying another word, Sarah stepped forward. Lucas followed her, his steps mirroring hers, and together they walked into the unknown, the path unfolding before them. As they walked, the air seemed to change. The oppressive silence that had filled the space was now replaced by a gentle breeze, a whispering breeze that carried with it a sense of calm, as though nature itself had exhaled in relief. The weight of the world was still there, but it no longer felt as burdensome. The tension that had plagued Sarah's every step, every choice, seemed to lift, if only for a moment. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tentative, unsure. "The right place," Lucas replied, his tone steady, but a hint of awe beneath it. "I think we're going to the place where all our choices come together." And in that moment, Sarah realized that the journey had never been about the destination. It had always been about the steps they took together, about the lessons learned along the way. The crossroads, the key, the choices, they had all been leading her here, not to a place, but to a moment where everything finally made sense. The figure who had guided them before appeared once more, now standing at the end of the path. It did not speak, but its presence was undeniable, a silent confirmation that the journey was complete. Everything had led to this. As they approached the figure, Sarah felt something shift within her, a deep, unspoken understanding settling into her soul. This was the culmination of everything, the trials, the pain, the doubts. It had all been for this. And then, the figure raised its hand, as if offering them one last choice. But this time, there were no more illusions, no more crossroads. The decision had already been made. They had already chosen the path, together. The figure smiled, a quiet, knowing smile. "You have done it," it said. "Together, you have chosen the right path. And now, you will live with the consequences of that choice." The light around them brightened. The path before them now bathed in a golden glow. The world was changing, transforming into something new. Sarah felt it in her bones. The future was no longer uncertain. It was clear. The journey had been long, but it had led them to this moment. With Lucas by her side, Sarah stepped into the light, and the world beyond awaited them. The finality of the moment was not lost on Sarah. As she stood at the threshold of the unknown, she reflected on all that had brought her here. The trials, the doubts, the pain, all of it had shaped her. But it was the people she had met along the way, especially Lucas, that had made her who she was today. It was their love, their bond, that had ultimately led them to this point. And as she stepped forward, she knew that whatever awaited them, they would face it together. For in the end, it wasn't the path that mattered. It was the choices they made, the people they loved, and the strength they found within each other. The journey has ended, but the story continues. What do you think happens next for Sarah and Lucas? What would you do if you were in their shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below.